Chapter 110. After increasing speed 6 times, the train became more and more comfortable, faster and faster, but it also lost the charm of the past. The clanking sound at the intersection of the tracks, the long whistle when the train entered the station and passed through the cave, the chimney that spewed out thick smoke like an old man smoking a hookah, the green train that once symbolized happiness and wandering into the future, the train that once ran over a poet who shouted facing the sea, the spring flowers bloom, and the green train that once traversed the east, west, north, and south, but was gradually being eliminated, could only be left in the memories of the older generation. At most, it would appear in black and white documentaries. Poplar Fruit, who was immersed in memories and thoughts, was inexplicably sad, but Kiki, who didn't understand the world, was inexplicably very happy. Chichi's big, sparkling eyes stared fixedly at the scenery flying by outside the window. Everything looked so fresh to her. Outside was a vast world, clean and clear blue sky, vast and boundless fields, and quiet rivers that flowed into the sea. Perhaps it was because she had lived in the concrete and steel forest for a long time, but now everything outside the window looked so close to nature and beautiful, although there were no goshawks flapping their wings, horses galloping, and flying fish swimming in the waves. The train passed through mountains and tunnels. After the darkness, suddenly light filled the entire carriage again, and the scenery was brand new again. Fish ponds, vegetable fields, banana trees, and sugarcane forests were all connected. The unique rural atmosphere of the Southern Kingdom was overwhelming. It was really beautiful. Following Kiki's gaze, Poplar Fruit also slowly smiled. Kiki liked the feeling of speed. The more she looked, the more excited she became. In the end, she laughed happily. Because it wasn't a holiday season, the train was empty. There were only the father and daughter in the soft-seat carriage that Poplar Fruit bought. Poplar Fruit didn't have to worry about disturbing others, so Kiki's bell-like laughter echoed in the carriage. 2 minutes later, Kiki was laughing happily, and Poplar Fruit was also smiling. 5 minutes later, Kiki was still giggling, while Poplar Fruit could no longer laugh. 15 minutes later, Kiki was still laughing. Poplar Fruit covered his head, his face full of black lines. This little fairy's lung capacity was really high. Even after laughing for so long, there was still no sign of her stopping. They were now on a train heading to the small county town in their hometown. It had been a few days since he and Zheng Yujie had a romantic relationship in the hotel that Poplar Fruit might never mention. There wasn't much to be proud of that week. First, they followed the usual procedure and went through the drowsy book launch. The representative of the United States gave a speech, the president gave a speech, and the editor-in-chief gave a speech. The president and the representative of the United States unveiled the golden silk cloth covering Steve Jobs' biography, and everyone opened champagne to celebrate. Throughout the entire press conference, Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie, the two real protagonists, were smiling from the side. In the end, the muscles on their faces were stiff from smiling. If there was a small interlude, there really was one. Before the press conference began, many reporters surrounded Poplar Fruit. Some asked Poplar Fruit serious questions about the book's sales estimates, and some asked Poplar Fruit if he was interested in entering the entertainment industry. Poplar Fruit patiently answered them one by one. Poplar Fruit smiled at the questions thrown by the reporters who were more like entertainment reporters. "Sorry, I haven't considered it yet." Poplar Fruit really didn't want to enter the entertainment industry. This was his true thought. However, the next day's newspapers were different. The entertainment tabloids had big headlines that said, "The most handsome translator in history. Enter the entertainment industry. Anything is possible in the future." Of course, Poplar Fruit, who didn't care about this, didn't care either. What made his heart tremble was another reporter from the Beijing Daily. The reporter asked him, "Mr. Poplar Fruit, Professor Rowling is very optimistic about you. He promised on a program yesterday that as long as you apply for his master's degree, he'll accept you without any exam. What do you think of this matter?" When Yang Guo heard the news, he was very touched. His friendship with Professor Rowling was only limited to the last press conference where they had an exchange in front of everyone. In fact, the word exchange was more appropriate to describe it as an exchange of views. However, he didn't expect Professor Rowling to be so supportive of him. One had to know that a world-renowned professor, one of the top translators in the translation field, was offering an olive branch to a young translator that he didn't know much about. This was a very big deal. With his status, how many people came to ask for his advice every year? Of course, there were many famous translators among them. Even if Poplar Fruit stood among them, he would only be a chicken in a flock of cranes. Of all the people he could pick, why did he have to do the opposite and take the initiative to invite him? However, Poplar Fruit had already made his decision. Faced with this opportunity, which was like a pie falling from the sky, he said emotionally, "How can Poplar Fruit be valued by Professor Rowling?" Unfortunately, 2 days ago, Poplar Fruit signed up for this year's master's degree exam online. He signed up for Higoshiyama University, which nurtured Poplar Fruit and deeply influenced Poplar Fruit's alma mater. Poplar Fruit can only apologize for Professor Rowling's kindness. Although I missed out on Professor Rowling's degree, Professor Rowling has always been Poplar Fruit's mentor and role model. If there is a chance in the future, Poplar Fruit will definitely learn from Professor Rowling. Poplar Fruit gave up on Beijing International Studies University, which was more famous and powerful in the field of translation, and chose to apply for his alma mater. This news caused quite a stir in the academic field. Even Poplar Fruit's alma mater was shocked. However, this was a story for another day. After the press conference, Zhang Yujie took Yang Guo to eat the best delicacies in Beijing for a day. What surprised Yang Guo was that these delicacies were not listed on the travel website, and were even hidden in the alleys and alleys of Beijing with a long history. There were not many tourists flocking over, only the neighbors and old Beijing people warmly supporting them. After that, Poplar Fruit returned to Yangcheng. It had been a few days since he left Beijing. His house was about to rot. Poplar Fruit did not see Song Jiwen. He only stayed at home for a day before taking his daughter back to his hometown. It was indeed time to go back. Poplar Fruit did not return home for half a year after the Chinese New Year. Kiki was almost 7 months old. Poplar Fruit did not bring her back to see his father. His mom and dad had nagged him many times over the phone. He patted his daughter's head. This time, he was bringing her back to acknowledge her ancestors. Although Poplar Fruit did not get married and had a child, he did not plan to hide it. Kiki was his most precious person. How could he wrong his daughter on such a matter? Speaking of which, Kiki loved to see the scenery and the feeling of speed. Poplar Fruit began to ponder in his heart. Should he buy a car and bring Kiki out for a ride? Poplar Fruit actually had the idea of buying a car when he was sitting in the Maserati in Beijing. He did not want to buy a very expensive car. Cars like the Maserati and Aston Martin were luxury cars that cost tens of millions. Poplar Fruit could not afford them even if he sold himself. But for a man, how could he not want to have his own car? However, it was still too early. Kiki was too young. He could not carry her to the car. Moreover, he had not saved enough money to buy a good car. So, he would think about this later. Kiki, who was high for more than half an hour, was finally tired. Poplar Fruit was afraid that her throat would be dry after screaming for so long. He quickly poured some warm water to feed her. Kiki drank half a bottle of water and fell asleep in her father's arms. Kiki fell asleep, but Poplar Fruit was very energetic. He looked at the window and felt a little bored. He rummaged through his carry-on bag. There was a book with a thickness of more than 200 pages lying quietly in it. It was an analysis of the ideological and political theory examination outline, the legendary political red treasure book that was necessary for the postgraduate entrance examination. He bought it at a roadside shop before he got on the car. Was he not going to take the postgraduate entrance examination? Poplar Fruit had checked that the English major he applied for had 4 subjects. There was no mathematics, comprehensive English, a second foreign language, linguistics, and the last subject was politic. Comprehensive English was no pressure for him now. Listening, reading, and writing, if he was stumped, he would be stripped of his title as a gold medal interpreter. He chose French as his second foreign language. Although he had a good grasp of other small languages like Spanish, Portuguese, German, and so on, French was his second foreign language course when he was in university. He could not be blamed for choosing it. There was nothing to prepare for this subject. As for linguistics, he had read more professional books in this area than some linguistics teachers. Poplar Fruit was confident that the postgraduate level exam would not be a problem for him. When he had time in the future, he would just do a few sets of questions to familiarize himself with them. The only thing that was a little unfamiliar was politics. After all, after his second year, Poplar Fruit had not come into contact with classes that he hated so much like Sai Xiu and Ma Yuan. However, the national conditions of China were like this. Just because you did not like it did not mean that it did not exist. On the contrary, this kind of boring political theory would never stop. The postgraduate entrance examination, such questions were absolutely indispensable. In order to take the postgraduate entrance examination, Poplar Fruit could only bite the bullet and gnaw on the hard and smelly political books like the other students. Therefore, before Poplar Fruit got on the train, he saw the book and bought it. He was bored on the way, so he could take a look. Rice could be eaten indiscriminately, but Poplar Fruit could not read indiscriminately. If he did, he would vomit blood. When other people were revising for the postgraduate entrance examination, they would wake up at the sound of the rooster and go to bed in the middle of the night. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. They would work hard day and night. As for Poplar Fruit, he flipped through the book on the slightly swaying train. 1 hour, 2 hours, before 3 hours, he had finished reading the book. Then he finished revising. Comparing oneself to others is infuriating. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Chapter 111. The train arrived at the small county's train station. From the train station to the small village, it took more than an hour to take a minibus. Poplar Fruit used a sling to carry Kiki in front of him. On his back, he carried a backpack that was as big as a hiking backpack. It was stuffed with all kinds of baby products for Kiki. Poplar Fruit's hands were not free either. He was pulling a big suitcase with one hand. During this trip to Beijing, Poplar Fruit bought a lot of gifts for his family. These gifts were enough to fill one suitcase. In the other suitcase, there was a folded baby trolley, Poplar Fruit's clothes, Kiki's clothes, the office laptop, and so on. Yang Guo was a freelancer now. She didn't have a fixed working time, but she also didn't have a clear break. Anyway, in her hometown, the nights were usually more boring. With a laptop, she could take on a few tasks to do. Although the weight of the 2 suitcases was nothing to Poplar Fruit, they were still very big. Therefore, Poplar Fruit felt very awkward dragging them. It took him a lot of effort to move them to the bus stop outside. After asking, Poplar Fruit found out that the nearest bus was still an hour away. He thought to himself, should I call a taxi? But looking at the 2 big suitcases in his hands, it was obvious that they could not fit. Then, he could only wait. After he steadied himself, Poplar Fruit looked at his hometown carefully. Hey, I've become prettier. Yang Guo couldn't believe her eyes as she looked around. In the past, the junction between the train station and the bus stop was filled with vendors. The dense crowd was walking in a hurry. Every day, they would leave behind a pile of paper. Near the corner of the wall, there were all kinds of small advertisements. The originally white wall was smeared with dirty water, garbage, and spray paint. The lower part of the wall was also stained with yellow stains. It was unknown which wicked person had secretly peed there. Of course, this was not a coincidence. It had been a long time since he came back. The place had been tidied up. There was no vomit-inducing garbage, no noisy peddlers, and even the walls had been repainted. The floor had been paved with bright tiles. Although it was not spotless, it was indeed difficult to find garbage that had been carelessly discarded on the ground. Because there were cleaners shuttling through the crowd at all times, once garbage was thrown down, it would not take long for it to be disposed of. The empty space on the street that was originally full of black cars was now a large service center. There were supermarkets, hotels, McDonald's, KFC, and a coffee shop that could only be found in big cities, Starbucks. The change in environment also affected people. Poplar Fruit remembered that even in public places, people in his hometown liked to talk at the top of their lungs. Those who did not understand Poplar Fruit's hometown dialect would think that they were quarreling. Old and young men liked to smoke hookahs. They could be seen smoking in the streets and alleys. That was how the smoky atmosphere at the train station came about. But now, Poplar Fruit saw men and women who were still dressed in rustic clothes. Their walking and talking had become very elegant. The women had become more reserved, and the men had become more gentlemanly. Of course, the hookahs that used to be the symbol of the small county no longer existed in this environment. Poplar Fruit heard from his dad that the county changed last year. It was said that he was transferred from a big city. He did not know if it was because of the new county magistrate, but his hometown had indeed become more beautiful. There was still an hour to go. Poplar Fruit was bored standing on the street, so he dragged his 2 big suitcases to Starbucks. Starbucks was not as popular as the 2 fast food restaurants next to it. The reason was obvious. Starbucks was expensive, and it was not something that the people in the small county could afford. Although it was changing, the change in nature still needed time, right? After ordering a cup of coffee, Poplar Fruit placed his backpack on the chair next to him and then sat down comfortably. It's so comfortable, Poplar Fruit thought. He could sit down quietly in his hometown, listen to slow songs, and drink coffee. The irritability from waiting for the bus was gone. The staff in the cafe had good taste. The songs they played were not the wild songs that were most popular in the county. After listening to 3 songs, Poplar Fruit felt that they were not bad. There were Chinese and English songs, and they were all slow and sad or gentle and sweet love songs. They were quite suitable for an environment like the cafe. He did not know if the manager was a foreigner. If he was a local, Poplar Fruit would definitely give him or her a thumbs up. After another song, Poplar Fruit stood up and was about to call the waiter for a cup of coffee. Just as he inadvertently glanced out of the window, a figure happened to float by. Poplar Fruit held back the voice that was about to leave his mouth. So familiar, was it her? Poplar Fruit stared blankly at the figure that had disappeared into the crowd. He looked in that direction for a long time and did not want to sit down. That's not possible. How could she come to Poplar Fruit's hometown? She's not from here. Poplar Fruit questioned his eyes in his heart. However, her eyes were telling her that it was Lu Yunran. How could he be wrong? That was the person he loved deeply for 4 years. That back, that hairstyle, and that dress, everything was so familiar. Suddenly, Lu Yunran's whispers still lingered in his ears. But why? Why did he feel that she had really gone far away? Even though it had been less than half a year since they broke up, he actually felt that it had been a lifetime in the blink of an eye. She had indeed left. Because of his mistake, it was impossible to turn back. You know that. There was a voice in Poplar Fruit's heart that kept whispering. He sat down weakly. He had no intention of chasing after her, and he did not feel the heart-wrenching feeling when they had just broken up. Had he silently accepted this ending? Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly. He was not laughing at himself, but at the song that the shop played. Why was it so coincidental? Why was it so accurate? Wasn't it singing his own heart? Love at that time, why was it so simple? And why was it that when people were young they had to hurt the person they loved deeply? In this similar late night, whether you are the same are also quietly regretting and feeling sad. If we hadn't been so stubborn back then now, we wouldn't be so regretful. This time, Poplar Fruit truly understood what kind of sadness milk tea was burying in the song Later. That's right. Later, I finally learned how to love. Unfortunately, you were already far away and disappeared in the sea of people. Poplar Fruit sang silently. Later, I finally understood in my tears that some people will no longer be together once they are missed. She did not want to cry anymore. She had already missed and would no longer be together. Their story would never be the same again. But, once or forever, there was a boy who loved the girl deeply. The song ended and the crowd dispersed. Poplar Fruit retracted his gaze and smiled slightly. Chapter 112. The bus stopped and sped away. Poplar Fruit, Kiki, and a pile of luggage were left behind. Poplar Fruit stood at the entrance of the village, rubbing Kiki's little head, who had woken up, and said with a smile, Kiki, this is our hometown. You can see your grandparents in a while. A cement road had been built in the village a few years ago, but the road was full of weeds and a mixture of red soil and cow dung. In fact, this was also a kind of rustic simplicity. After being used to the hard asphalt roads and high-rise buildings in the city, returning to one's hometown made one feel like returning to nature. It was now the harvest season of the Southern Kingdom, and the air was full of the smell of autumn, the fragrance of flowers, rice, fruits, and the green grass steamed under the scorching sun. Behind the village entrance, a small village path was hidden in the dense shade of the trees. On such a small path, Yangwa didn't need to worry about Chichi being exposed to the sun even if he didn't use an umbrella. This was very good, because Yangwa didn't have the time to open an umbrella. Twisting his body and loosening his shoulders, Poplar Fruit was ready to drag the two big suitcases home. He did not tell anyone that he was coming back this time, because he wanted to give his parents a surprise. But the problem was that no one would come to pick him up. Poplar Fruit had to drag his luggage home, and it was 1 or 2 kilometers from the entrance of the village. Agua! Behind him came a shout full of energy, followed by the unique clattering sound of an ox cart. Looking back, it was Uncle Seven, who had just come back with an ox cart. "Hey, Uncle Seven." Poplar Fruit greeted him happily. "It's really you." Seventh great uncle said with a smile, "I was worried that I might have mistaken you for someone else." Uncle Seven was in his 60s, almost 70 years old. At his age, he could still work in the fields, and his body was as strong as a young man's, but after all, age was unforgiving. Although his body was not old, his eyesight was a little blurry. If it was evening, without reading glasses, he could not see at all. "Where? Uncle Seven, you are in good health," Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "but I think that you should really enjoy yourself. Aren't your children working very well? You are persuading me again. Let me tell you, Uncle Seven, is not that I don't have children to take care of. I just can't be idle. If I don't do something every day, I will become rusty." Uncle Seven, sitting in the ox cart, laughed. When he got closer, Uncle Seven saw Kiki on Poplar Fruit's chest. "Agua, who is this?" "Yours?" Uncle Seven asked in disbelief. "You guessed right, it's my daughter, Yang Luochi. Chichi, say hello to seventh great uncle." Yangwa put down the suitcase in her hand and lifted Chichi a little higher so that seventh great uncle could see more clearly. Kiki was not afraid. She looked at Uncle Seven, and then looked at Da Nyo, who was pulling the cart. Da Nyo was Uncle Seven's treasure. He had raised him for 3 years. Every day, he would take him out to eat grass. Da Nyo's hair was shiny, and his muscles were coiled up. He was very strong, especially his 2 long horns. He looked like a fighter. Ordinary children would feel numb when they saw Da Nyo. They would shrink back and not dare to go forward, but Kiki was not an ordinary child. She was very happy when she saw Da Nyo. She wriggled and wanted to touch Da Nyo. From time to time, she would turn her head to greet her father. She pointed at Da Nyo and asked Poplar Fruit to come closer. Poplar Fruit saw her and laughed. "Kiki, don't make trouble. That is Da Nyo. Be careful of his temper." Uncle Seven laughed and said, "Agua, you are not even a child. Let her come closer to Da Nyo. What are you afraid of? I am not bragging, but Da Nyo's temper is the best in the village. Don't worry, I will watch." Since Uncle Seven said so, Poplar Fruit went over with Kiki in his arms. He was still worried. He was still holding back his strength in his right hand. He was worried that Da Nyo would suddenly not cooperate. He could still stop him. However, Poplar Fruit worried too much. Da Nyo was very docile. He looked at Kiki gently as if he was looking at his own child. In order to let Kiki feel him, Da Nyo lowered his head and tilted his horns to the ground. Kiki's small hand gently slid across Da Nyo's forehead. The hair there was very compact, but it was also very clean. Kiki was still not satisfied. She grabbed Da Nyo's horns with both hands. Poplar Fruit was shocked. He was worried that Da Nyo would explode, so he quickly pressed one hand on Da Nyo's horns. However, he did not feel any strength. Kiki, who was satisfied, giggled. Nyo slowly raised his head and looked at Kiki with his big eyes. He rolled his tongue and snorted happily. You are an interesting child. Uncle Seven squinted his eyes and smiled. Ah Gwe, did you leave without saying goodbye this time? Uncle Seven said politely. Poplar Fruit remembered that Uncle Seven did not study. He did not know if it was because his sons had installed a TV at home these few years. He probably learned some new words from watching TV. Haha, yes, I wanted to give my parents a surprise. Poplar Fruit laughed. Then come up. Uncle Seven will drive you back. Look at the big and small bags you brought. Uncle Seven patted the ox cart and said, Don't tell me that after going to a big city, you don't even dare to sit on Uncle Seven's ox cart. How could that be? Thank you, Uncle Seven. Poplar Fruit was not polite. He carried the 2 suitcases and stuffed them into the ox cart. Then, he lifted his leg and boarded the ox cart. Let's go. Uncle Seven patted Nyo's butt. Nyo understood and walked forward. Although it was slow, it was more leisurely. That kind of fun was not comparable to modern transportation. Sitting in the front, Uncle Seven began to hum a little tune while holding the ox rope. The tune that Uncle Seven was humming was a dialect drama from Poplar Fruit's hometown. There was nothing praiseworthy about the general content. It was nothing more than the plot of a county magistrate who could not resolve a dispute between neighbors. However, when it was sung in the local dialect, the rough lines had a different charm in the euphemistic tune. Indeed, it could be said that it was behind the times, but it had to be said that it was very interesting to listen to occasionally. Kiki liked it very much. She listened very seriously and even shook her head. She was very much like the old opera fans in the tea houses of the old era in the capital. Poplar Fruit laughed and patted her little head. He did not know if Kiki understood it, but she was indeed very talented in music. She seemed to be able to distinguish the rhythm of the song. She was not like her father, Poplar Fruit, who was born unable to distinguish the tune of a song. Perhaps she inherited it from her mother. 2 kilometers was not close, but it was not far either. Poplar Fruit could already see his own courtyard from afar. Because Uncle Seven's house still had to go downhill, Poplar Fruit thanked Uncle Seven for his kindness and got off the ox cart at the intersection. Okay, then you can walk back by yourself, Uncle Seven said. It's okay, Uncle Seven, don't worry. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Thank you for today. I just came back tonight, so I didn't prepare anything. But tomorrow, don't make a fire in your house. Come to my house for dinner. At that time, the 2 of us can have a chat. Okay, I'll go tomorrow and see your child. I think I have an affinity with this child. Haha. Uncle Seven laughed and drove the ox cart home. In Poplar Fruit's house, Fu, the Chinese rural dog, which was an ordinary big yellow dog, began to wander back and forth in front of the courtyard, wagging its tail and barking non-stop. Poplar Fruit's mother, Shu Jinfeng, was feeding her grandson Yang Linjie lunch in the hall. Hearing the noise, she nudged Poplar Fruit's father, Yang Tai, and said, Old man, go and see what's going on. Fu is barking so loudly. What can it be? Yang Tai sat on a bamboo chair in the hall and leisurely fanned himself. He said lazily, It's uncomfortable if it doesn't bark every day. How can it be the same? Shu Jinfeng kicked him again. Usually, when someone walks by, Fu will just make a fuss and not bark. This time, it's abnormal. Could it be that someone is coming? Who would come on such a hot day? Yang Tai was too lazy to move. He squinted his eyes and said faintly. There was even a few snoring sounds coming from his nose. Are you going or not? Shu Jinfeng couldn't stand Yang Tai's lazy appearance the most. She directly stuffed her foot under his butt and stored up her strength. If he didn't get up, she was going to kick him down. His wife was angry, so Yang Tai didn't dare to continue enjoying his afternoon nap. He struggled to sit up and said discontentedly, At this time, the people in the village are either working in the fields or hiding at home. Who would come in the afternoon sun? However, Fu's barking didn't stop. Yang Tai also stood up and prepared to go out to see what was going on. Shu Jinfeng frowned and said, Could it be that Guozi is back? Have you gone crazy from missing your son? Yang Tai pulled on his slippers and turned around to sneer. Didn't Guozi call a few days ago? He's on a business trip in Beijing. Why would he come back? You men only know how to go on business trips all day. You don't care about your home at all. Guozi is right. How old is little Kiki? She's not even a year old and is already running around. Beijing is so chaotic. What if Kiki is taken away by someone? Xu Jinfeng said with a bitter face. Women are always thinking about useless things. Yang Tai said, I know what kind of person Guozi is. Even outside, my granddaughter is taken care of by him. Nothing will happen. Furthermore, Guozi is going to Beijing for some meeting. He's going to do something big. Our old Yang family finally has someone who can stand out. Aren't you happy? Yang Tai added. That's not what I meant. Xu Jinfeng frowned as she stood at the entrance of the hall and said unhappily. While they were arguing, Yang Tai had already walked to the door. He used his foot to chase away Fu, who was wagging his tail, and opened the door. The large iron door creaked open. Their son Poplar Fruit, who they were just talking about, was standing at the door with a box in his hand. Poplar Fruit and Kiki, who was sitting on his chest, were looking at them with a smile. Chapter 113. The old couple couldn't believe it and stood there in a daze. Instead, it was young Linjie, who was only 3 years old, who reacted first. Uncle! Young Linjie shouted happily. He came out from behind his grandmother, Xu Jinfeng, and wanted to rush to Poplar Fruit. Xu Jinfeng quickly stopped him, pointed at the porridge on his face, and said, It's dirty, don't smear it on your uncle. Dad, Mom. Poplar Fruit laughed heartily. I'm back. It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back. Xu Jinfeng's wrinkled face was full of smiles. She pushed Yang Tai, who was standing there stupidly, and said, Why are you still standing there? Hurry up and help our son move his things in. At this time, Yang Tai woke up from the surprise. He didn't know how to express his feelings. He rubbed his hands and felt that they were dirty, so he quickly wiped them on his body. As he walked to his son, he repeatedly said, Okay, okay. Dad, it's okay. You just rest. I can do it alone. Poplar Fruit didn't want Yang Tai to help him carry his things. He dragged the 2 big suitcases and squeezed Yang Tai, who came to help, into the yard. It's a little dirty. Yang Tai didn't help. He moved a bench and put it on the cement floor under the eaves. He pointed to the yard and said, The yard at home wasn't covered with cement, and it was still a large piece of soil. Although they hadn't farmed in the past 2 years, they still raised cattle, so the place next to the cattle pen was full of grass and cow dung. It did look a little dirty. However, Poplar Fruit grew up on this land. How could he care about this? He carried the 2 big suitcases on the cement floor, one in each hand, and then clapped his hands and said with a smile, Dad, do you need to do this? I'm not afraid of being dirty. He's just afraid that you're used to living in the city and not used to living in the countryside. Xu Jinfeng said, But I say, our son was born and raised in the countryside. How could he forget his roots when he went to the city? Isn't it just a little bit of soil? Is it as hard as we used to be? Exactly. Poplar Fruit smiled in agreement. Dad, just sit down and rest. I'm home, not a guest. I don't need your help. Good, good, good. Yang Tai smiled and sat down on his bamboo chair. However, before he could sit properly, he stood up again and approached Poplar Fruit. He looked at Kiki and said, Is this young Luochi? Poplar Fruit hurriedly unloaded the big bag on his back and put it on the bench. Then, he carried Kiki out of the straps and carried her in front of his father. He said, Yes, Kiki, this is Grandpa. Quick, call him Grandpa. Grandpa. Poplar Fruit knew that his attempt was futile because he had never taught Kiki how to call her grandparents. However, he still gave it a try. Kiki, of course, didn't understand what her father was calling her. She was just carried by her father's 2 big hands with a blank face. Her eyes rolled around as she looked at the stranger in front of her. She rubbed her calves to show her doubts. Good, good, good. Yang Tai smiled until the crow's feet at the corner of his eyes rose to his forehead. He was about to take Kiki when Shu Jinfeng, who had just put the bowl in the kitchen, saw them and exclaimed in a flustered and exasperated manner, "Old man, be careful. You farmer, don't be so careless. Don't let little Kiki fall." Shu Jinfeng rushed to their side and looked at Yang Tai with a worried expression as he carried Kiki. She was worried that Kiki would fall. "How can that be? Didn't I also carry little Ping and Fruit when they were young?" Yang Tai said unhappily as he carried Kiki. "That's because you were young. 10 or 20 years have passed. Count yourself, how old are you now? You've been a farmer for so many years, and all your strength has been spent on the land. What do you know about carrying a child?" Shu Jinfeng nagged. Hearing the last word, Poplar Fruit quickly reached out and covered Kiki's ears. He whispered to his mother, "Mom, stop arguing with Dad. Don't swear in front of Kiki. She's a fast learner now." Originally, Kiki was a little unwilling to be carried by her grandfather. Now that her father was covering her face, Kiki started to struggle unhappily. Poplar Fruit then put his hand down. "That can't be," Shu Jinfeng said in disbelief. "How many months has Kiki been?" 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Taking everything into account, it's only been 6 months. She's already learned how to speak. When you were 1 year old, you didn't even know how to call Mom. Why would I lie to you?" Poplar Fruit laughed. "Let me demonstrate for you too." Poplar Fruit did as he said. He lowered his body and leaned into his father's embrace. His finger hooked Kiki's little nose. He smiled and said, "Kiki, quick, call Dad." "Dad." Kiki's originally unhappy mood was immediately swept away by her father's intimate action. She opened her little mouth and laughed. After hearing her father's second signal, Kiki called out loudly, "Dad." "Good girl." Poplar Fruit rubbed Kiki's little nose again. Shu Jinfeng grabbed his hand and said, "What are you doing? Don't keep touching little Kiki's nose. If you keep moving it, it'll become a flat nose in the future. You're exaggerating, right?" Poplar Fruit said in disbelief. "You've been holding her for so long. Let me hold her." Shu Jinfeng reached out and said to Yang Tai. Yang Tai was dissatisfied. He muttered, "I've only been holding her for a short while. How is that long?" He hugged Kiki and avoided Shu Jinfeng's arms, refusing to give her. "Are you going to give her to you or not?" "You." Shu Jinfeng put her hands on her waist and said angrily, "You're a big man. Do you know how to hold a child? Can't you see that little Kiki is very uncomfortable in your arms?" Yang Tai had no choice but to transfer the right to hold his granddaughter. Shu Jinfeng hugged Kiki and said proudly, "Grandma loves my little Kiki the most. Yesterday, I don't know who was the one who said that he had no grandchild to hold, no grandchild to hold. I think you're a feudal old man in the old society. What era is it now? You still have the mindset of valuing boys over girls." At this time, Poplar Fruit looked at Yang Tai in confusion. This won't do. Kiki was the most important person in Poplar Fruit's heart. If his father thought this way, he would have to have a good talk with his father. Otherwise, wouldn't Kiki be wronged in the future? "That's not what I meant." Yang Tai said stubbornly, "I didn't say that I don't like granddaughters. I'm just saying that with fruit like this, it won't be easy for him to find a pure girl to be his wife. If he has a child, who would want to marry him? Without a wife, he won't have a son. Without a son, my young family won't have a grandson to carry on the family line." In the end, it was still the same meaning. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The Mid-Autumn Festival is here. I wish everyone a happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Chapter 114. Perhaps due to the underdevelopment of transportation and information, Poplar Fruit's hometown was still heavily influenced by feudalism. Even in the second decade of the 21st century, the concept of carrying on the family line was still deeply rooted. Yang Tai was not well educated, and he was a farmer with his back facing the sky. He was more concerned about the issue of family inheritance. In his mind, poplar fruit was the hope of carrying on his bloodline. However, poplar fruit had not married yet, and he already had a child. Moreover, it was a girl. How could he not feel anxious? However, he also knew that times were different. Television always talked about changing one's mindset, so he was not willing to show that kind of thought. He hid it, but the knot in his heart was difficult to eliminate. His son had not come back, and he was worried that he might not be able to hide his thoughts and not be nice to his little granddaughter. He kept telling himself to restrain himself. However, to his surprise, when he saw Kiki's cute little face, young Tai felt as if he saw poplar fruit and young Ping when they were young. His heart softened, and he could no longer bring up any thoughts of discrimination. When he hugged Kiki, young Tai was even more gratified. The smile on his face came from the bottom of his heart. Where did the word restrain come from? There was no need to restrain himself at all. Dad. Poplar fruit pulled young Tai aside. He was afraid that Kiki would hear him, so he whispered, "What time is it now? Why are you still thinking like this?" "I'm not." Young Tai wiped his clothes with his palms and said unhappily. "Whether you are or not," poplar fruit emphasized, "Kiki is your granddaughter. She is your son's child. She is the next generation of our young family. It doesn't matter if she is a boy or a girl. What matters is that our family can live happily. That's enough. I don't want you to worry too much. It's not like your son can't make a living and has nothing to eat. Your son is becoming more and more promising. The money he earns in a month is more than what you can earn in 10 years of hard work. So, you don't have to worry that your son can't find a wife. When fate comes, a wife will come," poplar fruit said with a smile. But, young Tai grabbed poplar fruit's arm and said, "Won't the girl care that you have a daughter? The premise is that she has to accept and even like Kiki." Poplar fruit patted his father's calloused hand and smiled. "And Kiki has to like her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to step into our house. Don't think that it's impossible." Poplar fruit raised his hand to stop young Tai, who was about to speak, and said, "There are still many good girls in the world. Your son is not bad. He will definitely find one. You can rest assured." Young Tai couldn't find a reason to refute, so he let out a long sigh and faintly said, "All right, take care of yourself." Dad can't help you much, so you have to rely on yourself in the future. But little Kiki, you don't have to worry that Dad won't like her. Dad can't wait to see her. Look at your mother, she won't let go of her. You can talk to her later." Poplar fruit laughed and said, "That's none of my business. You have to talk to Mom yourself." "Talk about what?" Shu Jinfeng asked curiously. "Nothing." Young Tai didn't dare to say, so he replied unhappily. "Look at your son. You haven't seen him for half a year. Don't you feel that he has changed a lot?" Shu Jinfeng chuckled. Young Tai, who was careless, finally paid attention. He carefully looked at his son. Originally, poplar fruit was a little taller than him. Now, he realized that poplar fruit was more than a head taller than him. Even that face was much clearer than before. When a man looked at another man, he usually wouldn't pay attention to whether the other man was handsome or very handsome. At most, he would think that the other man was a little better looking. As for how much was a little, he didn't care. And young Tai wouldn't use such a fashionable word like handsome. When talking about good looks in the countryside, no matter if it was a man or a woman, they would say that they were very good looking. If it wasn't for poplar fruit's actions and voice being the same as before, young Tai would have suspected that his son had been swap. But, how could there be such a big change in half a year? Young Tai expressed his doubts. Shu Jinfeng also agreed, "Yeah, I think it's strange too." Poplar fruit scratched his head and said, "Maybe it's because I've been exercising more. I recently learned a set of boxing from a master. Practicing every day might have stimulated my third puberty." Poplar fruit didn't know what was going on. He tried to find the reason himself, but he could only forcefully link it to his own boxing. The origin of the boxing naturally couldn't be told. Poplar fruit just made up a master. Shu Jinfeng and young Tai weren't human researchers. They didn't doubt this reason, and they weren't interested in getting to the bottom of it. And at this time, they met with another problem. As soon as Kiki came back, she attracted the attention of Shu Jinfeng and Yang Tai. The whole family surrounded her. The little nephew, Yang Linjie, who was originally the most favored in the family, couldn't stand it. This treatment was originally for him alone. How could he be neglected when a little sister came? Yang Linjie was still very active when Poplar Fruit came in. Every time his uncle came back, he would bring delicious food for him. Even when he saw Kiki, he was very curious and came over to take a look. But later, he found that his sense of existence had fallen to the bottom, so he stood aside unhappily. Shu Jinfeng hugged Kiki for a long time. Yang Linjie finally couldn't stand it anymore. He walked forward and hugged Shu Jinfeng's leg. He said vaguely, "Grandma, I want to hug too." Okay. Wait a while. Shu Jinfeng didn't care and said casually, "No, I want to hug now." Yang Linjie said unwillingly, "You can't hug now. Grandma is hugging the little sister." Shu Jinfeng explained. "Woo-woo, I want Grandma to hug me. Grandma, hug me." Feeling wronged, Yang Linjie started to cry. He tugged at Shu Jinfeng's trousers and shook them, refusing to give up. After crying twice, he sat on the ground and made a scene. But the ground was full of dirt and grass. Poplar Fruit's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He rushed over and hugged Yang Linjie, who almost rolled to the ground. "Little Jie, why are you crying? Can you tell Uncle?" Poplar Fruit patted the crying Yang Linjie's back and comforted him. "Woo-woo, Grandma won't hug me," Yang Linjie said with grievance. He didn't stop crying. Crying is contagious among children. Chichi turned her head and looked at Yang Linjie, who was crying loudly. She looked at her father, who was hugging him, and Chichi also puckered her lips and cried bitterly towards the sky. "Ayo, my sweetheart, why are you crying?" Shu Jinfeng shook Kiki and comforted her. Kiki's voice was originally loud and clear. Although she came later, her voice gradually overshadowed the older Yang Linjie. Not knowing if it was because he didn't want to be outdone, Yang Linjie also opened his mouth and cried louder and louder. The two children's cries intertwined as if it was a crying duet. However, in such a loud crying, the symphony wasn't as pleasant. As long as Kiki cried, no one except Poplar Fruit could stop her. Poplar Fruit, who loved his daughter, quickly exchanged comforting partners with his mother. Kiki also returned to her father's arms. Under her father's gentle comforting, Kiki finally stopped crying. With tears in the corner of her eyes, she touched her father's ear and smiled through her tears. Yang Linjie also gradually calmed down. He got his grandma's attention and comfort as he wished. In the end, he hugged Shu Jinfeng's neck tightly and refused to let go. It was as if Shu Jinfeng would abandon him if he let go. Poplar Fruit hugged Kiki. With one hand, he opened the big suitcase full of gifts and took them out one by one. "Mom, look, these are the clothes I bought for you from Beijing." Poplar Fruit picked out a few big bags from the suitcase and then took out a few colorful old clothes and showed them to his mother, Shu Jinfeng. Although it was said to be old-age clothes, the style and color were quite trendy. "What's the point of wasting money? It's not like I'm wearing too many clothes." Shu Jinfeng looked and said unforgivingly. Although she said she didn't want them, the expression on her face was blooming with joy. "Why did you buy so many expensive clothes? Won't people laugh at you if you wear them?" Shu Jinfeng said. "How can that be? Mom, look, these clothes are very nice. If you wear them, you'll definitely look 10 years younger. Dad won't be able to keep it," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Child, how can you say that?" Shu Jinfeng said with a smile. "Why would I keep it for her? With her looks, do I still need to keep it for her?" Yang Tai said with dissatisfaction. "What's wrong? Do you think she's ugly now? Why didn't you say so earlier? If you said so earlier, I wouldn't have married you, old man." Old, Shu Jinfeng felt that this word was inappropriate. She paused and said, "Back then, I was also a flower in the 3 villages and 5 strongholds. If it wasn't for you being honest, would you have a chance?" Poplar Fruit smiled as he looked at his parents bickering. The old couple couldn't avoid these arguments in their life. However, their feelings didn't fade because of this. Instead, it was like tea leaves. The more they argued, the more mellow it became. "Dad, this is the hat and pipe I bought for you. There are also a few packs of good tobacco. However, you have to smoke less. These are enough to satisfy your craving. Smoking too much is not good for your health." Poplar Fruit said. "Why did you buy these? I only smoke hookahs. Take them away." Young Tai shouted. He pretended that he didn't care at all, but his eyes kept glancing at the pipe. "Our son bought it for you. Just take it. Why are you saying so much?" At this time, Shu Jinfeng turned around and lectured young Tai. "Shou Jie," Poplar Fruit called. Young Linjie, who was lying in his grandmother's arms, turned his head and saw the transformer toy in Poplar Fruit's hand. "What a big one. It's bigger than the one I saw when I went shopping with Mom." Young Linjie's eyes lit up. Poplar Fruit held the transformer toy in his right hand and shook it. He smiled and said, "Shou Jie, do you like it? Uncle bought it for you from Beijing." At this moment, the little grievance just now had disappeared from young Linjie's heart. It was replaced by endless ecstasy. He broke free from his grandmother's arms and rushed to Poplar Fruit with joy. Isn't this the mood between children? It's bad fast, but it's good fast too. On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, I wish everyone can eat mooncakes and enjoy the moon. Most importantly, you can be with the person you like. Chapter 115. Poplar Fruit actually had one more thing to deal with when he came back this time. Previously, he had been busy taking care of Kiki, so he hadn't found a suitable place for Kiki's birth mother, Wu Yu. Poplar Fruit felt guilty. Wu Yu was an orphan, so it was impossible to trace back to her hometown. The saying of a fallen leaf returning to its roots could basically be rejected. Poplar Fruit pondered. Regardless of whether Wu Yu had feelings for him or not, she was still the mother of his precious daughter. He had also had a one-night stand with her, and she was still a pure girl when he did it with her. No matter what, he had to give her an explanation. Therefore, when he came back this time, Poplar Fruit brought back the urn of ashes on the top of the bookcase. He wanted to bury Wu Yu in his family's graveyard. Every year, during the Qingming festival, he could take care of her grave. When Kiki grew up, he could also bring her back to see her birth mother, whom she had never met. However, burying an outsider, nominally, let's just call Wu Yu an outsider for the time being, in his family's graveyard wasn't a small matter. His father, young Tai, was a big obstacle. Therefore, on the first night back, Poplar Fruit and his father lay on the bamboo bench in the yard and talked for a long time. Finally, his father was convinced. Young Tai looked up at the starry sky and sighed deeply. He said, "Since you've made up your mind, go ahead and do it. Go early tomorrow and don't make a fuss. If the neighbors know, it'll be embarrassing. As for the family, I'll talk to your granduncle. It shouldn't be a big problem." Therefore, Poplar Fruit groped around in the dark at 4 o'clock in the morning. At that time, the sky was still dark, and the surroundings were quiet. Only Ah Fu stood up when it heard the noise. Poplar Fruit patted its head and said softly, "Ah Fu, it's okay. It's me." Then, he carried Wu Yu's urn of ashes and a hoe and pushed the door open. When he passed by the villagers, the people who had dogs barked a few times. In order not to disturb the rest of the villagers, Poplar Fruit quickened his pace and trotted all the way. When he ran, he used a bit of skill. With a tap of his toes, he bounced up as soon as he landed. He was as light as a swallow, and in a flash, he was already far away. The village did not turn on the street lights after midnight. Poplar Fruit could only rely on the twinkling starlight. Fortunately, his eyesight was better than most people's, and a little light was enough. The young family's graveyard was on the back of a small hill 2 to 3 kilometers away from the village. There was a clear lake beside it. Although the lake was not large, this graveyard had a bit of feng shui. The journey was neither far nor near. When Poplar Fruit arrived, the sky was already turning bright. However, at this moment, the shadows of the trees by the lake were swaying, and there was also a bit of wind. Amidst the whistling sounds, There were quite a few black shadows baring their fangs and brandishing their claws in the dim tombs. It was a sight that made one's heart go numb. Even Poplar Fruit had an impulse to turn around and run away. Don't be afraid, there are no ghosts in this world. Poplar Fruit trembled and whispered to comfort himself. Yes, there were no ghosts in this world. People scared others, and he scared himself too much, so there were ghosts. Poplar Fruit gathered his courage and walked closer. Only then did he realize that there were some plastic bags floating in the bushes. Poplar Fruit breathed a sigh of relief. He was a little speechless, and the fear in his heart suddenly disappeared. He picked a piece of land near his grandfather, and there were not too many tombs crowded together. He gently put the urn of ashes aside, then picked up the hoe and started to dig. If it was the young Guo of the past, he would be too weak to even stand up to a gust of wind and wouldn't be able to handle this hoe. But now, he was very strong. He could easily lift the hoe, and with a swing and a dig, a large piece of soil was turned over. If it's just the urn, young Guo doesn't need to dig a big grave. After digging a dozen times, the basic structure is dug out. After a little bit of trimming, a square 1 cubic meter grave is ready. Poplar Fruit clapped his hands, knelt on the ground, and picked up Wu Yu's urn of ashes. He gently stroked it, sighed softly, and said, "Wu Yu, Kiki was born. Why didn't you persist? Why did you leave just like that?" Poplar Fruit seemed to have returned to the time when he rushed to the hospital. Wu Yu was lying alone on the hospital bed, her face was pale, and her forehead was full of sweat. "I know you suffered a lot," Poplar Fruit muttered, "but you should have told me. Why did you bear it alone?" "Am I, Poplar Fruit, such an irresponsible person? If you had told me, you wouldn't have ended up like this. Kiki didn't have a mother when she was just born. Whatever I say now is all in hindsight. I know. I blame myself too." Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly. "When I saw you, I should have encouraged you more, instead of asking you this and that. I should have grabbed your hand and given you the confidence to live, instead of looking at you with suspicion. Why was I so stupid? You are also stupid. You didn't protect yourself. Is the child so important to you? You don't know, if it were another irresponsible man, Kiki would have become an orphan. Do you know?" Poplar Fruit said with a choked voice, "Aren't you afraid that our child will repeat the same mistake?" Poplar Fruit gently placed the urn in the center of the grave, stared at it, and said, "But don't worry. Since you sacrificed your life to give birth to Chichi, since you've handed our child to me, I will definitely take responsibility until the end. Kiki is very good now. She eats well and drinks well. She is pampered by me at home, and outside, she is cared for by my grandparents and my friends. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you, but I named our daughter Yang Luochi. Yang is the Yang of Poplar Fruit, and Luochi is the Luo and Chi next to the Wang character. The homonym is the fallen angel, which means an angel given to us by God. But according to our country's customs, she is our little fairy. Don't even mention how cute she is now. Regarding the two words angel and fairy, it is actually related to the change of the title of the book. You can look at the earlier works. But don't worry too much about these details. Poplar Fruit began to dig out the sand, pick up the stones, and slowly put them in with his hands. While filling the grave, he said, "So you can go without worry. In the future, I will often bring Kiki back to see you. Oh, by the way, our daughter is very smart. Have you seen any family's child who can speak at the age of 6? Our Chichi can do it. She can call me daddy so easily now." "What, are you angry? She hasn't learned how to call mommy yet, right?" Poplar Fruit began to talk to himself, and answered his own question, "But don't worry, when we go back, I will let her learn. I guarantee that she will know how to call mommy, but if she asks, 'Who is mommy? Why is mommy not here? What should I do?'" Poplar Fruit didn't care about the dirt on his hands, and scratched his head and asked. Chapter 116. "Okay, I got it." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "I will find a stepmother for Kiki, so that she can feel the warmth of home. Of course, she must love Kiki, that's the prerequisite." Poplar Fruit was talking to himself, while filling up Wu Yu's grave. Then he took out a rectangular piece of wood from the long bag on his back. When he returned to Yangcheng City, Poplar Fruit went to find a carpenter to make it. It was engraved with the words "My wife, Wu Yu's grave, erected by Poplar Fruit. I was in a hurry, so I didn't have time to prepare a tombstone for you. How about this? Poplar Fruit said with a smile, when I come back next year, I will give you a better one. After erecting the tombstone, Poplar Fruit stood up. He held the hoe and looked at the hazy sky. It was almost 5 o'clock, and the villagers were about to get up and get ready to go to work. Yang Guo was not in a hurry to go back. He looked around and then walked to the lakeside. He used a hoe to carefully dig out a Chinese redbud that had just grown for less than a year, along with its roots. Chinese redbud was a relatively common shrub in the south. It was very different from the Chinese redbud in Hong Kong. It was not as beautiful, but it was more adaptable to the environment. During the process of transplanting, even if it was planted in the sand, it could still survive. The reason why Yang Guo chose Bauhinia was because he remembered a poem by the Tang dynasty poet Wei Yingwu, seeing the Bauhinia flower, miscellaneous heroes have accumulated, leaving only the fragrance in the late spring. Like the trees in the old garden, suddenly remembering the people in the old garden. The Chinese redbud flower also had the meaning of family harmony and deep affection. Perhaps it was the most suitable to use it to commemorate the passing of Wu Yu. This redbud was still young, and he estimated that it would only bloom next year or the year after. By the time the flower bloomed, Chichi should have grown up. At that time, bringing her to see Wu Yu and seeing the flower bloom brilliantly might not be a bad thing. Poplar Fruit carefully planted the Chinese redbud in front of Wu Yu's grave. He was worried that its roots would disturb Wu Yu. After planting it, Poplar Fruit stood up with a smile, clapped his hands and said, "Wu Yu, I will stop here today. I have helped you to prepare the place, you can rest in peace. In the future, I will come to see you often." Poplar Fruit looked at the newly built grave affectionately, picked up the hoe and walked back to the village without looking back. The sky was already bright. When he returned to the village, Poplar Fruit could hear many people washing and talking in the courtyard. The farmers all woke up at sunrise and returned at sunset. It was not strange for them to wake up at 5 o'clock. If they woke up late, people would say that they were lazy. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit did not meet anyone on the way home. This saved him the trouble of making up excuses. A few years ago, his parents also woke up early to take the cows to work in the fields. After Poplar Fruit let them rest for 2 years, his parents did not need to wake up so early. Poplar Fruit returned to the courtyard. The house was still quiet. He was not sleepy anymore. After washing his hands, he started his morning practice in the courtyard. He still practiced his Tai Chi first, he practiced slowly. He fully stimulated and honed every muscle and cell in his body. Then, he practiced quickly. His movements were so fast that his shadow could not be seen clearly. When he was about to stop, his father's voice suddenly came from behind him. "Not bad. You are much better than the old man I saw when I went to your sister's place." Yang Tai said with a smile, "No wonder you grew so tall in a year." Poplar Fruit was speechless. How could the Tai Chi that the aunties and old men in the park practice be compared with his? But he did not intend to explain to Yang Tai. He wiped his sweat, turned around and smiled at Yang Tai. "Dad, why are you up so early? Why don't you sleep a little longer?" "It's okay. I am old. I will wake up by myself if I sleep at this time." Yang Tai waved his hand and said. He walked under the eaves, took a dry towel, and wiped the dewy bamboo bench in the courtyard. Then, he lay down comfortably. After a while, he asked, "Is everything done?" Poplar Fruit nodded and said, "It's done." "That's good." Yang Tai squinted his eyes. He grabbed a cattail leaf fan and gently shook it. "Your mother has been nagging me about this for a long time. Don't worry. If you do it well, I will take care of it for you later. It's not a big deal." Even though Yang Tai was a yes-man in front of Xu Jinfeng at home, in the clan, he could be considered as a person of authority. He was also a character in the village. Sometimes, when it came to important matters in the village, such as the foreign students and the village chief, they would ask him for advice. This was also what Yang Guo admired about her father. Last night, Xu Jinfeng could not hold back and told Yang Ping the news of Poplar Fruit's return. Therefore, this morning, Yang Ping and her brother-in-law, Yang Chongguan, rushed back from the county. When she saw Poplar Fruit, Yang Ping did not dare to recognize him. She really could not believe that the brother she had watched grow up had become so tall in the blink of an eye. He did not look like a southerner at all. When the two of them came back, their son, Yang Linjie, was the happiest. However, Yang Linjie's limelight was once again stolen by Qi. Yang Ping just hugged and kissed her baby son and put him aside. She intimately hugged Qi and looked at her left and right. Yang Linjie was not jealous like yesterday. The Transformers toy Poplar Fruit gave him was not warm yet. After he was put down by his mother, he ran into the house and took the Transformers toy out, showing it off in front of his father. After putting down Qi, Yang Ping pulled Poplar Fruit aside and said with a serious face, "Fruit, what are you thinking?" "What do you mean, what am I thinking?" Poplar Fruit laughed. "You are not married yet, and you have a Yang Ping stuttered towards the end. Poplar Fruit knew that she wanted to say the word burden, but Poplar Fruit did not blame her. "Sis, don't worry about me." Poplar Fruit patted Yang Ping's shoulder and laughed. "How can I not worry about you?" Yang Ping was a little annoyed. She said, "Mom told me that you only went for one blind date that she arranged for you. After that, you never went again. If you don't interact more with other girls, how can you find a wife?" Poplar Fruit did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Sis, don't mention blind dates. Blind dates are the most unreliable thing." Yang Ping glared at him and said, "Who said they are unreliable? Didn't I meet your brother-in-law through a blind date? That's different. You are lucky." "No, my brother-in-law is lucky." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Moreover, I am 23 or 24 years old this year. Is it necessary to worry about my marriage so soon? If you don't have a child, you can play however you want. But it is different now." Yang Ping said with disappointment. "If you don't get married while the child is still young, what if the child grows up and is sensible and refuses to let you find a wife? Besides, at that time, other girls will despise you for having such a big child. You can't hide it even if you want to." "I don't have to hide it. When I find a wife, she must first be able to accept and like Qi. This is the prerequisite," Poplar Fruit said seriously. "If she doesn't like Qi, I won't accept her. Also, I think that you don't have to worry about me. When fate comes, my wife will come." After chatting with his sister for a while, Poplar Fruit, his mother, sister, and brother-in-law, Yang Chongguan, drove to town to buy groceries. Because it was not only Poplar Fruit's family, but also a few uncles and other relatives in the family were invited for dinner. It was considered as bringing Qi to everyone, so there were a lot of groceries to buy. The whole family was mobilized, and only Yang Tai stayed at home to look after Yang Linjie. Carrying Qi, Poplar Fruit smiled and followed behind them with a basket. The market in town was not as clean as the one in Yangcheng, but it was better in terms of the variety of vegetables, especially the seafood, which was just delivered by the fishermen who went out to sea last night. It was dripping with water and very fresh, and none of it was frozen. Many people in the market in town were from the village, so they were very familiar with his mother and sister. Seeing Xu Jinfeng greet them, Poplar Fruit could only open his mouth, not knowing how to address them. Actually, Poplar Fruit still had some impressions, but after entering high school and university, his knowledge and circle of friends were no longer limited to the small town. His memories of the past were not very good, and now, they were all blurred. Poplar Fruit could not help with the cooking, so his mother, sister, and a few other village women took over the chores. Poplar Fruit also did not have time to help, as he was busy comforting the crying Qi. Qi was originally very happy today, as she could go shopping with her father, and even take the car. But when she got home, all the aunts and uncles came to see her. The cute Qi was naturally loved by everyone, but it was not enough to see her. Soon, Qi was carried out from her father's arms, and a few women smiled and hugged her. Those who were hugging Chichi were reluctant to put her down, while those who were waiting couldn't help but touch Chichi's delicate little face. In a flurry of hands and feet, Chichi was tormented by this group of women who were full of maternal instincts. Kiki's mood quickly turned from sunny to cloudy, and finally, she could not bear it anymore and simply cried. She waved her little hands, crying and shouting loudly and vaguely, "Dad! Dad!" Poplar Fruit heard the cry and ran over, feeling sorry for his daughter, and hurriedly carried Kiki back. But Kiki did not cooperate this time. She was still unwilling to stop when she returned to her father's arms. She hugged her father's neck and sobbed pitifully. Her tears were all over Poplar Fruit's neck, and she only stopped when it was almost time to eat. The banquet in the countryside was naturally not as exquisite as in a big hotel, but it was very sumptuous. Fish, scallops, prawns, small abalones, and other seafood were dazzling. Chicken, duck, streaky pork, roast suckling pig, and other meat dishes filled the plates into a small mountain. There was no delicate cooking, just a big wok with a big fire. It was enough to stir-fry. Everyone was not very picky, and they just ate for fun. Many people sat down to eat and then left in a hurry. Only the few granduncles at the main table sat there calmly. Young Tai accompanied them to chat and drink, and it was quite comfortable. Poplar Fruit was busy clinking glasses with the relatives who came to toast and congratulate him. Poplar Fruit had vowed not to drink again, and this time, he also did not drink. He secretly prepared a bottle of plain water for himself, and with this bottle of plain water, he hid from many people. The house was lively, and it made Poplar Fruit forget about the sadness of burying Wu Yu in the morning. Indeed, the dead can rest in peace, and the living still have to live well. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations, everyone use your votes to support the poor. Chapter 117. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. A few silver snakes slithered through the dark sky. It was as if there was a sinister smile on a face covered by a black cloak. If someone happened to be standing in the wilderness and saw this scene, they would definitely be scared witless. The heavy downpour washed this piece of land, washing away the impetuous lead, washing away the rolling dust of the mortal world, and also erasing the traces of evil. On the transportation artery that ran from north to south, a long freight train hurried along in the heavy rain. Because it was a freight train, its speed was not like the high-speed rail and bullet trains of today, which could easily reach 200 to 300 kilometers per hour. It still retained the unhurried slowness of the old freight trains. In the noisy sound of the rain whipping, a few black shadows ran quickly along with the train. Then suddenly, like a black leopard, they jumped, grabbed a railing, and climbed up one after another. The rain became heavier. These few black shadows braved the raging wind and rain. In the darkness where they couldn't see their own fingers, they pried open the door lock of a carriage, then pulled it open, entered, and closed it again. The wilderness and the train returned to their original appearance. Other than the sound of the train and the sound of the storm, there was no other movement. It was like a magical painting, but there was nothing strange about it. Ha ha, ha ha. Inside the train carriage, in the same darkness, there was a few heavy breathing sounds, followed by a crazy laughter. Motherfucker, what are you laughing at, you little bastard? A panting voice was heard. Fuck. Are you scolding me? The owner of the strange laughter scolded back. I'm laughing at the boss for being too talented. What do you know? He scolded. The person who spoke first was very unhappy and scolded back. The two people lay in the darkness, scolding each other across the air, making the whole carriage buzz. Blah 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 blah. Stop arguing. Suddenly, a sinister voice was heard, and the two people who were having a good time immediately ceased their quarrel. When the sinister voice opened his mouth, a string of strange syllables came out of his mouth. It was the language of a small Southeast Asian country, Thailand. He also knew Chinese, but from the second half of the sentence, his Chinese pronunciation was not so standard. It was very strange. Yes, boss. The two men respectfully replied. Blah blah blah. Another slightly younger voice was heard. It was also in Thai. What he said was, "Boss, we should go back and snatch that guy back." Slap. A clear slap sounded in the darkness. Are you stupid? The boss scolded in Thai, "That guy has already fallen into the hands of the police, and you still want to kill him? Are you stupid or stupid? Are we going back just like that?" In the darkness, a thin, medium-height shadow stood up. Judging from the voice, it was the young Thai man. He shouted unwillingly, "It's not easy to come here, but I didn't get any money. Big brother, how are we going to explain this to father? Supan, you've done your best." The man who had laughed the loudest earlier also comforted him in Thai. "If it weren't for our boss's vigilance, we might have been killed by the police. Let's go back first. It won't be too late to come out and earn money in the future. There's a Chinese saying, where there's life, there's hope. There will be more money in the future." That's right, that's right. There was another man who spoke in Chinese. He could understand Thai, but he couldn't speak it well. He simply didn't speak and let the man who had just quarreled with translate. "We'll climb into this car, and nobody will know. We'll sit until we reach the border. At that time, I'll ask my brother who plays in the sea to take us away on a fishing boat. Once we reach Vietnam, we'll be safe." Liu Depao, can you finish reading the whole sentence? The man suddenly stared at Liu Depao, who was translating for him. "Don't fucking cut corners. Do you think I won't listen to you?" Liu Depao didn't back down and said, "If you're so good, then do it. I'll do it for you. I'll be tired. Stop quarreling." The boss slapped the carriage, and the iron plates clanged. The entire carriage immediately quieted down. After a pause, the boss leaned against the cardboard, closed his eyes, and coldly said, "Do you still have the guns?" Supan's eyes lit up as he patted his bulging waist and said, "Here, big brother." Liu Depao nodded and said, "They're all here. Boss, before we left, we wrapped the guns in our raincoats." "Good." The boss didn't stand up, but he suddenly opened his eyes. His bell-like eyes actually had some luster in the dark. He glanced at the three men and said slowly, "We can't go back like this." "That's right. Boss, what are we going to do?" Supan excitedly rushed to say, "Should we kidnap someone? Catch a woman and sell her? China is full of good-looking beauties." At the end of his sentence, Supan swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Boss is talking. Why are you interrupting?" Liu Depao pulled Supan. "Supan, you're really stupid." The smoker fumbled for a cigarette and took a deep puff. He laughed at the side, and the red light flashed in the dark. Ignoring what the other three were saying, the boss continued, "This time, we escaped and took this train to the south. The police will never guess that we're here. Since we're going, let's make some money before we leave. Listen to me, the plan is like this." After listening to the boss, the few men rubbed their hands, especially Supan. He was drooling and laughing. "What? Do you want to do it?" The boss looked at them and asked. "Of course. Why not? You too, I'll kill the one who doesn't want to do it." Supan patted his lean chest and shouted. "Supan, don't think that you're the only man." Liu Depao pushed him and said angrily, "Who said we don't want to do it? You dare to fight with me? I'll kick your head off." Supan's brain was simple, and he was about to go berserk. "Sit down." The boss roared, "Do you still see me as your boss, your big brother?" Me. Supan listened to his big brother the most. Although he was not convinced, he still sat down. After calming down, the boss said, "That's it. Tomorrow, we'll go check out the area early, and then we'll take action. After we make some money, we'll leave immediately. No mistakes. If anyone dares to mess around, I'll make them wish they were dead. Do you hear me?" The boss didn't roar at the end, but his gloomy voice made people feel fear. "Yes." In the dark night, the train finally passed through the wilderness covered by the rain, and drove into the dark and deep silence. Chapter 118. At night, the relatives and friends left one after another, and the young family finally returned to its usual peace. Of course, the trash and messy dining table still needed to be cleaned up. Poplar Fruit was chased back to the house by his mother and sister to take care of Kiki, so he couldn't help with these chores. Therefore, Poplar Fruit made a bottle of milk for Kiki before bed. While making the milk, Poplar Fruit also took the time to upload the picture of Kiki playing with Afu on Weibo. Poplar Fruit really liked this picture. Although Afu wasn't very photogenic, it was the most ordinary Chinese rural dog, but Kiki looked so cute with it. At that time, Kiki was lying on a small chair, and Poplar Fruit had just changed her diaper. Afu curiously wagged its tail and came over. Yanghua wasn't as worried as Chichi was when she was facing Da Nyo, because she knew that Fu was a very docile dog. Normally, it would be obedient in front of the family and would never bare its teeth in front of guests, let alone bite. Afu came to Kiki's side and sniffed Kiki's scent. Its tail wagged even more happily. Poplar Fruit knew that this was a sign that Afu was happy. Kiki was even happier. She opened her mouth and giggled as if someone was tickling her armpit. Of course, even if someone really tickled her, she wouldn't feel itchy. She struggled to sit up and looked at Afu with her big eyes. Afu also stuck out its tongue and looked at Kiki. The girl and the dog looked at each other like this for a while until Afu couldn't help but turn its head and snort. Kiki was immediately amused. She danced and shouted, "Daddy, Daddy." She called Poplar Fruit and asked him to look. At this time, Kiki's little hand accidentally hit Afu's head. Poplar Fruit was shocked. He was worried that Fu would overreact. But it didn't. Afu was patted once, and he fell straight down. His head rested on the little chair, right under Kiki's little palm, and his tail wagged non-stop. Kiki seemed to have realized that she had hit Afu. She pursed her lips slightly and reached out her little hand to gently touch the back of Afu's neck. Poplar Fruit, who had been standing by the side, quickly took out his phone and recorded this heartwarming scene. In the photo, Kiki's expression looked as innocent and cute as a little fairy, and Afu's big round eyes were wide open, allowing Kiki to stroke the soft hair on the back of his neck comfortably, full of warmth. Afu was a female dog. According to Yang Tai, Afu had given birth to a puppy in the middle of the year, but it was given away when it was only a few months old. Poplar Fruit didn't know if Afu had transferred its love to Kiki, but he felt that this photo was too loving. At night, Poplar Fruit carried Kiki, who had been washed clean, to the bed to play. For some reason, Kiki was very excited today and hadn't slept yet. His parents were too tired, so they went to bed early today. Poplar Fruit wouldn't go back to the source, and Yang Ping didn't continue to ask about it. Soon, the topic changed. "Fruit, I heard from Mom that you're working at home now? What kind of work?" Yang Ping asked curiously. Yang Ping had studied before. Although it was just a technical secondary school, and her grades were a mess, she had learned English after all. However, it seemed that she had stayed in a small town for too long and was out of touch with the times. It was hard for her to understand the concept of freelance work. "It's my profession. I'm a translator for people. I translate English into Chinese, or translate Chinese into English." Poplar Fruit smiled and explained to his sister in detail. "Can you earn money?" Yang Ping asked worriedly. "You still have Kiki to take care of. How much can you earn by working at home? You even bought so many things for us." She was referring to the bags of clothes that Poplar Fruit had just bought from Beijing's Wangfujing. "Haha, sister, don't worry about me," Poplar Fruit laughed. "I'm earning a lot of money now." Hearing her father's laughter, Kiki immediately threw down the pillow that she was playing with. She sat up straight and looked at her father, giggling. "You should save some money to get a wife in the future," Yang Ping lectured. "You don't want us to arrange blind dates for you. When you find a wife in the future, you'll have to spend a lot of money." How did the topic of blind dates come up again? It was probably because Yang Ping and Xu Jinfeng had reached a united front and hadn't given up yet. She wanted to find an opportunity to persuade Poplar Fruit to change his mind. Poplar Fruit, whose scalp was numb, scratched his head and quickly changed the topic. "Don't worry. I still have a lot of money. By the way, sister, brother Guan, how are you doing now?" Poplar Fruit asked about their financial situation. "How can we do? Same old," Yang Ping said. Yang Ping was working as an ordinary accountant. Her salary wasn't high, but it wasn't tiring. The family's money was mainly earned by Yang Chongguan. Yang Chongguan was a retired soldier. He learned how to drive in the army, so he was assigned to drive in the government hostel after he retired. Of course, the car he drove wasn't a car. It was just a small van that the hostel used to transport goods. The work wasn't very tiring, and the actual salary wasn't high. However, he still earned some money when he went out to purchase goods. The couple's income was considered average in a small county. They even bought a house last year. However, they became mortgage slaves after they bought a house. Every month, they had to pay a high mortgage. Their lives were a lot more difficult. In addition, after 1 or 2 years, young Linjie would have to go to kindergarten and primary school. This was a bottomless pit. When the time came, even if the couple invested all their money, they still wouldn't be able to fill it up. Poplar Fruit and young Ping were chatting. Ah Fu, who was standing guard outside, squeezed a gap in the closed door. It stuck its head out to take a look and sneaked in sneakily. When the door squeaked slightly, Poplar Fruit noticed it. However, the house wasn't renovated. The floor was made of rough cement. Many small cracks were stuffed with mud. Therefore, Poplar Fruit didn't care if Ah Fu would dirty the room. Although he didn't chase it out, Poplar Fruit still looked at Ah Fu. He was worried that it would jump onto the bed. Obviously, Poplar Fruit worried too much. Ah Fu was such a good dog. How could it do something unpleasant? It simply swam around the bed and sniffed Chichi's scent in the air. Then, it barked twice. Woof, woof. Kiki, who was a little tired from crawling around, heard the barking. Her confused little eyes suddenly lit up. She was very excited. Using her hands and feet, she quickly climbed over the pillows and climbed to the edge of the bed. Under the protection of her father's arms, Kiki lay on the edge of the bed and looked at Ah Fu with a smile. She also mimicked it and barked, "Wow, wow." Kiki's mimicry wasn't very similar, but it was very loud. Ah Fu excitedly jumped twice on the ground and barked back. Chichi still wanted to learn from Yang Guo, but Yang Guo didn't allow her to do so. She kept yelling at night, and it was too disturbing. It took Poplar Fruit a lot of effort to stop these two playmates from having so much fun. If they got together again, Kiki wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. He hugged Kiki in his arms and coaxed her to sleep. Ah Fu didn't go out. It circled around twice and quietly lay down next to a chair. Its head was on its forelegs, and it gently looked at Kiki, watching her slowly fall asleep. After Kiki fell asleep, Poplar Fruit put her on the bed. Then, he looked back at his sister and brother-in-law. His eyes sparkled as he asked, "Have you ever considered starting your own business?" Chapter 119. Poplar Fruit's sudden words made the whole house quiet down. Yang Ping and Yang Chongguan were stunned for a long time, as if it was a very difficult question. If they were in a developed area or other cities, this question might not even need to be asked. People already had the answer in their hearts. Do it or not, that was all. But in Poplar Fruit's hometown, this small county in the corner, maybe because it was too far away from Yangcheng and other developed cities in Guangdong province, people were content with the status quo, enjoying a peaceful and poor life, and lacked the passion to pursue something. Most people had never even considered the problem of starting a business. Starting a business had risks, and they didn't dare to take the risk. Being poor but not wanting to improve, this was a very ironic cycle. Yang Ping was like this. It could be said that she had never lived in a city outside of her hometown for a long time. Even if she had a technical secondary school, she had studied in the city. Although she knew a lot about the outside world through the internet, she was still inexperienced. She naturally resisted the word entrepreneurship that Yang Guo mentioned. This isn't what we want, right? Yang Ping stuttered behind her words, obviously hiding her fear. Yang Chongguan was different. He went to the north to be a soldier and came back. Following the army, he still had a passion in his heart. But after years of hardships, this passion wasn't much left. Starting a business isn't something we can do just because we want to. Yang Chongguan smiled bitterly. To start a business, you have to have money, right? We haven't even paid off the mortgage, how can we have money to think about starting a business? We can't mortgage the house to gamble, right? Although there were many difficulties, Yang Chengguan's words were obviously different from Yang Ping's. Yang Ping's subtext was, "It's not good, let's not do it." Yang Chengguan's meaning was, to start a business, we have to solve the problem of money first. In his mind, he still had the inclination to start a business. "Yang Chengguan, if you dare to touch this house, I'll pinch off your ears." Yang Ping was usually gentle, but when it came to big matters, she inherited her mother's fiery character, Xu Jinfeng. She was also merciless when she spoke. "I didn't mean that. What I'm saying is that you can't. That's just a metaphor," Yang Chengguan complained. Looking at the couple bickering, Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "If you don't have money, I can lend you some." Yang Ping was stunned. She turned her head and said in disbelief, "Borrow money? What money do you have to borrow? You've only graduated for a little over a year, and you don't have a job yet. Yo, sister, don't look down on your brother." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Anyhow, your brother is a young talent with an annual income of millions." "A million? What did you do to earn so much?" Yang Ping's face was still suspicious as she stared into Poplar Fruit's eyes. Translation: "I already told you, but you didn't believe me," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Knowledge is wealth. Your brother relies on his brain to make a living. No need. You can keep the money you earn to find a wife," Yang Ping said. Poplar Fruit was speechless with his sister. He simply ignored her and said to Yang Chengguan directly, "Brother-in-law, have you ever thought about what you want to do if you want to start a business?" Yang Chengguan shook his head and said, "No. We don't have any knowledge or culture. What can we do?" Yang Ping said. She was still thinking about dispelling the idea that Poplar Fruit started. "Who said so?" Poplar Fruit said. "Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about our county. Which rich people have high education? Didn't you see that those big bosses didn't have any education? As long as you have the courage to try, nothing is impossible. How about we open a restaurant?" Yang Chengguan asked. Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, "No, there are a lot of restaurants in our county. We don't have anyone who is particularly good at cooking. Ordinary rural dishes aren't competitive. How about a car repair shop? I'm good with cars. Opening a car repair shop shouldn't be a problem," Yang Chengguan said excitedly. "It's not that simple." Poplar Fruit once again rejected Yang Chengguan's idea. He explained, "First of all, the auto repair business is actually very controversial. Most of it is monopolized by those who have connections with the Traffic Control Bureau. We can't compete. Besides, in a small place like ours, there aren't many good cars. We can't bear to spend money to repair the bad cars. If we open an auto repair shop, it might be a losing business." "He only knows how to drive," Yang Ping interrupted and said, "Why don't we buy a truck and let him run the business?" Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Let's go to a sports car. It's hard work, and the money isn't much. Brother-in-law, you might as well stay in the guest house. It's better that way." "I'm not talking about those who go to other places to deliver goods," Yang Ping explained. "Isn't the express delivery industry recruiting partners now? In the county, the things I buy on Taobao can't be delivered by express delivery. I can only send them to the post office. I think if we buy a car to deliver the goods, it should be a good business. There's a delivery." Yang Chengguan patted Yang Ping's shoulder and said, "A few days ago, I was driving on the east side of the city and saw a new express delivery shop. Then, I heard that there were a few in the south side of the city that were preparing to open. You really know how to pick the time. When I wanted it, there wasn't a single one. Now that I saw the business opportunity, someone else took it first." Yang Ping said dejectedly, "Express delivery makes money, but it's hard work." Poplar Fruit nodded and said, "But, you guys gave me an idea." Poplar Fruit was full of energy and said with a smile, "We can't do express delivery, right? Then, we'll do the upstream link." Looking at Yang Ping and Yang Chengguan's puzzled faces, Poplar Fruit explained, "Nowadays, online shopping is popular. Sister, you just said that you like to shop online. Then, the market is very big. Opening a shop on Taobao is cheap and easy to operate. We just need to receive the order online, and then we can deliver the goods to the customers. So, why don't we open an online shop ourselves? Open an online shop? What do we sell? Yang Ping asked doubtfully. We sell the specialties of our hometown, Poplar Fruit said happily. We're a coastal city. We have the most seafood. We can sell sandworms, dried fish, shrimps, and other dry goods. We can also sell some frozen seafood depending on the situation. Besides these, there's more. Don't we have a lot of fruits here? I know that there are many fruit canned factories in the village. We can sell that too. If we sell it here, it'll be much cheaper. There's also handicrafts. We have clay figurines and wood carvings here. Like the ones in Nanhai Island, we can also buy some coconut shell sculptures, shell necklaces, and other unique handicrafts. These should be very popular on the internet. Yes. I have a lot of friends here. They all want to bring some handicrafts as souvenirs. Yang Chongguan said in agreement. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, I think, brother-in-law, you've worked in the guest house for so many years. You should be familiar with the suppliers. This is good. We can find the best quality and cheap goods. Then, we can sell them online. We can definitely make money. Looking at Yang Ping and Yang Chongguan, whose eyes were shining and obviously moved, Poplar Fruit smiled and said, How about it? I'll invest in you. Do you dare to give it a try? Everyone, use your votes to buy the poor. Chapter 120. The sun was shining brightly today, or perhaps it was too beautiful. The sun was shining brightly in the sky without any clouds. The whole world was shining brightly, making people feel flustered. It was already November, but the weather in the southern kingdom was still not as cool as it was in autumn. The steam rising from the asphalt road distorted the pedestrians in the distance, and the bushes on both sides of the green belt were scorched yellow by the sun, making it look like autumn. Even though it was noon and a working day, the biggest bank in the county was still bustling with people. It was not difficult to understand. Many people actually took advantage of the 1 o'clock break to deposit and withdraw money from the bank. However, the bank was closed at noon, so only 1 or 2 windows were open. It was quite annoying. Squeak. There was an ear-piercing braking sound, and a van stopped on the opposite side of the road. The sudden braking sound attracted the attention of passers-by. Opening the door, a man bent down and walked out. His long legs and height made people unable to help but take a second look. Could he be a tourist from the north? People thought. Because of his height, he had already left the men in the small county a few streets behind. The average man in the county was about 1.6 to 1.7 meters tall. This was the case in the southern part of the country. The local Poplar Fruit, who did not know what they were thinking, stood beside the car door. Yang Chongguan, Yang Ping, and Xu Jinfeng, who came to the city with him, smiled and said, You don't have to come down. I'm just going to the bank to transfer the money. I'll be out soon. Take Kiki to the shady place downstairs and wait for me. After saying that, Poplar Fruit closed the car door and watched Yang Chongguan drive away. After lunch, they took a car to the county. Shopping was secondary. Poplar Fruit was going to the bank to transfer the money. They had discussed it last night. Yang Chongguan and Yang Ping decided to listen to Poplar Fruit's suggestion and open an online business. Yang Chongguan said something reasonable, which was rare. If you don't take the risk, you will be poor for the rest of your life. Give it a try. Even if you fail, you will have to start from the beginning. Yang Ping's hesitant heart was won over by this heroic and lofty aspiration. After crossing the road at the zebra crossing, Poplar Fruit walked to the bank, calculating the money in his card. In the past few months, he had earned more than 300,000 yuan. After deducting his usual expenses, he still had about 300,000 yuan left. But this time, Dongshin gave him a salary of 150,000 yuan for translating the biography of Steve Jobs. 100,000 yuan was the agreed remuneration for the translation, and 50,000 yuan was the remuneration for his other duties and the subsidies for holding a press conference in Beijing. To be honest, the money he earned as a translator was not as much as what he earned from doing missions. It was also several times harder. This was also a strange circle in the translation industry in the country. When translating for a publishing company, the translator would always be paid a fixed amount. Regardless of whether the translation was good or bad, or whether the book sold a lot or not, it had nothing to do with the translator. It was no wonder that the literary translation circle was getting smaller and smaller. Poplar Fruit was like many predecessors in the literary translation industry. He relied more on his interest in this industry, but after all, he could not do it for a long time. He could only treat it as a supplement after completing his missions. He had also thought about changing the bad situation in the translation industry, but he could only think about it. Now, Poplar Fruit was just a small translator. In terms of qualifications and reputation, it was not worth mentioning. How could he change the entire industry on his own? Poplar Fruit now had about 450,000 yuan in assets. He planned to give 250,000 yuan to Yang Ping. 50,000 yuan was for them to pay off their mortgage and get rid of their worries. 200,000 yuan was for them to start their own online store business. Of course, it was not realistic for two people with a low level of education to force their way into this industry. Poplar Fruit also contacted Fat Dragon and asked him to help find someone who knew technology and how to run an online store to guide Yang Ping and Yang Chengguan. Stepping into a new industry, no matter how it was before, it was necessary to keep learning if you wanted to do well. In addition to the two of them, Poplar Fruit also planned to give 200,000 yuan to his parents. Their house was actually one of the worst ones in the village. Although their house occupied a larger area, it was still a thatched house with a few small bungalows. It looked too shabby. This 200,000 yuan was for Yang Tai to find someone to renovate his house. After chatting in the morning, Poplar Fruit made a budget. 200,000 yuan was enough to build a very good 3-story bungalow in his hometown. It was also enough to renovate the yard. Poplar Fruit even joked, "Dad, you should quickly find someone to talk about renovating the house. I don't want to come back during the spring festival and have no place to stay." There were still more than 2 months before the spring festival. It was more than enough to renovate the house. In this way, Poplar Fruit would become penniless again, with less than 10,000 yuan left. However, Poplar Fruit did not mind. The money was spent, and it could be earned back. With Poplar Fruit's current ability, was there a need to worry about not having enough money to spend? After entering the bank, Poplar Fruit took a number and sat down at the rest area to wait. He looked around in boredom. There were still many people in the bank. Some were standing, some were sitting, some were men, and some were women. There were all kinds of people. Although he was not a detective, Poplar Fruit was still interested in what they did. The woman at the counter should be a shop owner. As for whether she sold clothes or other products, he did not know. She had been sitting there for a long time. She did not withdraw a lot of money, but she changed it into loose change. It was really hard on the counter staff, who forced herself to be alert and count the stacks of bills for her. The woman who was anxiously walking around the counter should be an employee of some company. She came here during the lunch break to deal with her personal business. Seeing that it was almost 2 o'clock, she began to worry if she would be caught by her boss when she returned to the company. However, she did not want to give up just like that. She had waited for so long, but this woman who had been changing loose change for a long time was driving her crazy. There were a few people sitting in the rest area. One of them was an old man with white hair. He was dressed like a farmer. His face was full of vigilance, and his eyes scanned the surroundings like a radar. His hand was tightly holding the wallet in his arms. He probably sold the fruits of his hard work for a year and came here today to save it. There were also 2 ladies who were chatting happily. One of them was an accountant. She came here today to deal with business. However, the business counter was closed at noon, so she did not mind. Waiting in the air-conditioned hall was not a torturous thing. The other lady was an acquaintance of hers. Her hair was permed into wavy waves, and she even dyed it into Poplar Fruit's color, which was a bit vulgar. Her dressing was very fashionable, but it was only at the level of a county town. Perhaps if time went back more than 10 years, such a combination would also be popular in a big city. This lady was preparing to travel abroad. When Poplar Fruit came in, he saw that under the guidance of the security guard, she had used her card to exchange a few thousand Hong Kong dollars. She was waiting to collect it at the counter later. It seemed that they had not seen each other for a long time. Once they started talking, they could not stop. The accountant lady was very envious of the curly-haired lady's life. She asked about the price of the curly-haired lady's clothes and praised her for marrying a good husband. She did not have to go to work and could even travel around. Poplar Fruit was not interested in listening to the boring conversations between these women. He looked at the last person in the rest area. It was a tall and strong man. He did not look like a southerner compared to Poplar Fruit. He was a bit of a crane in a flock of chickens among the crowd. Although he was wearing a loose sports jacket, the muscles under the jacket were bulging. A few clothes could not cover them at all. Feeling Poplar Fruit's gaze, he opened his bell-like eyes, looked at Poplar Fruit, and then smiled in a friendly manner. Poplar Fruit was also a bit embarrassed. He smiled back at him and looked away. The lady who opened the shop left after finishing her business. Just as the door was closed, it was pushed open again. A few strings of laughter like silver bells came in, immediately waking up the sleepy bank hall in the afternoon. A burst of youthful aura hit their faces. Poplar Fruit looked. It turned out to be 4 high school girls from the nearby middle school. They were all wearing the school uniform that Poplar Fruit was very familiar with. This set of blue and white school uniform was the style of Poplar Fruit's junior high school. Poplar Fruit looked at it with some nostalgia. He had not seen this kind of uniform for a long time. It was almost time for class. He did not know if they were skipping class to go shopping. They did not seem to be in a hurry at all. One of the girls inadvertently saw Poplar Fruit. Her eyes lit up. She looked at Poplar Fruit and then turned to whisper to the girl in the middle. The girl heard her friends whisper and turned to look at Poplar Fruit curiously. Poplar Fruit also looked at her. After being noticed by Poplar Fruit, the girl did not feel shy at all. She openly looked at Poplar Fruit's face for a few seconds, and then continued to whisper to her friend. As they chatted, they even burst into laughter. Poplar Fruit looked away. He suddenly felt a bit interested. He had been paying attention to the uniforms they were wearing. When he looked at them just now, he realized that one of the girls was very beautiful. The beautiful girl was the one who made eye contact with Poplar Fruit. Of course, her appearance could not be compared to Duan Xueqing and Zhang Yujie. She looked very pure and beautiful. She looked a bit like Zhu Xiaoyu, the female lead in last year's Love Under the Hawthorn Tree. She was so delicate that it made people feel pity for her. Poplar Fruit's alma mater's uniform was very narrow and slim for girls. Therefore, for these girls who were obviously very well developed, the uniform not only did not cover them, but also showed off their proud curves. It was not only her face. That girl's figure was also the best among the 4. Presumably, this kind of baby-faced, XX girl would have countless young boys in his alma mater go crazy for her. Even if it was a fire pit, they would still come wave after wave, right? Poplar Fruit sighed in his heart. Disaster. What is a disaster? This is a disaster. Before he finished speaking in his heart, the glass door of the bank was pushed open again. This time, the voice that came in was not as beautiful as before. Rob. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Chapter 121. The door of the bank was suddenly pushed open. The cool air in the hall seemed to be affected by the outside heat and became chaotic. Everyone was stunned as they watched 3 masked men walk in. It's a robbery. The shortest Monkey King stammered. Pa. The man with the clown mask slapped the back of the Monkey King's head and scolded in Thai, Supan, if you don't know how to speak, then don't speak. Shame on you. He pushed his companion who was wearing the doorman mask and said, you come here and tell them that we are robbing. No one in the hall knew what they were talking about. Poplar Fruit also didn't know. He hadn't learned Thai yet. At this time, he finally felt the lack of language in his body. But, robbery? What kind of joke is this? Everyone looked at the 3 people in a daze. They didn't realize that they were facing a crime. They were still wondering if they were shooting a movie. One person realized it. It was the tall and strong man that Poplar Fruit saw before. The moment the door was pushed open, he suddenly turned around to look. Murderous aura. Yes, this man felt murderous aura from the three people. These three people have seen blood. Things are not simple. He lowered his body and shrank behind the chair as much as possible. Then, he slowed down his breathing and restrained his breath so as not to attract their attention. Then, he carefully observed. This is not good. He groaned inwardly. Each of the three men was waving a pistol in their right hand. With the police force of this small county, he doubted if he could catch them if they were to fight. Hey, hey, hey. The man wearing the doorman mask shook the pistol in his right hand and said to the people in the hall with a smile, "We are robbing. Do you know how to rob a bank? Fuck, you guys be serious. Get down." Bang. A loud gunshot echoed in the hall. The bank's security guard trembled and knelt down. There was a big bullet hole in front of him. "Did you see that?" Doorman proudly shouted, "I told you not to move. Get down. If you move again, the next bullet will hit your head. All of you, get down on your knees. Did you hear that?" Doorman suddenly changed its tone and roared angrily. This roar finally woke up the people who were frightened by the gunshots. They finally understood that the three people in front of them were not from the circus to amuse them. They were really robbers. There were all sorts of screams and cries in the hall. Poplar Fruit, who was still relatively calm, immediately lay down obediently. His heart was thumping, and he secretly raised his head to watch the development of the situation. The female employee who was sitting in front of the window was so scared that she slipped from her chair and fell to the ground. She covered her mouth and tears flowed down her face. A few female students who had just entered hugged each other and squatted on the floor in front of the rest area, crying in fear. The two women who were chatting happily just now were now lying on the ground. The female accountant wanted to hug the woman with the curly hair and cry, but the woman with the curly hair pushed her away. Her hands and feet were trembling. She wanted to squeeze into the gap between the chairs, but she was too fat to fit her fat body. The old man who was in a hurry to save money was sitting furthest away from the rest area. At this moment, he was still in a state of shock. He sat upright and foolishly watched Doorman walk to his side. "You don't want to cooperate, right? You want to die, right?" Doorman used a teasing tone to threaten him. He curiously pulled at the wallet the old man was holding, but he didn't manage to pull it out. "Yo, you still treasure it?" Doorman was angry. He suddenly smashed the butt of the gun at the old man. This was not a light blow. The old man was smashed to the ground and couldn't make a sound for a long time. Blood oozed from his head and trickled down to the floor, making it extra obvious. "Ah, ah." The women's screams were even more ear-piercing. Bang! There was another loud sound. Doorman fired a shot at the ceiling and then waved the gun. The muzzle of the gun pointed at everyone and he angrily shouted, "Don't fucking make a sound. Whoever dares to make a sound, you will end up like this old man." Doorman opened the wallet and saw a few stacks of cash. He was immediately overjoyed. He threw the wallet to Supan and said in Thai with a smile, "Take it, there's money. Hurry up. Robbing the bank is more important." The boss wearing the clown mask said coldly. Doorman pulled the bank security guard over and pointed the gun at his head and pushed him to the front of the counter. The bank tellers behind the bulletproof glass were so scared that they couldn't stop screaming and crying. Throwing the two luggage bags on the counter, Doorman knocked on the glass with the butt of the gun and said, "Hey, hey, don't be afraid. Do you hear me? Don't cry. Otherwise, I will kill him. Uncle Shu, woo-woo." The younger teller was still crying. She only stopped after a while. "You." Doorman motioned to the person who looked a bit calm and said, "I know you pressed the alarm, I don't blame you, but if you don't fill up these two bags in 15 minutes, I'll kill him. Don't think that you are safe just because the police are here. This whole hall is filled with our hostages. If you make us unhappy, we will kill all of you." The supervisor looked at Uncle Shu, whose head was squeezed against the bulletproof glass and had a pitiful look on his face. He could only nod his head submissively. You still have 14 minutes. Hurry up. Doraemon smashed the glass with the butt of the gun and threatened. The supervisor hurriedly called a few tellers under her and took out the money from the safe under the counter and then stuffed it out from under the bulletproof glass. Supan, you watch. The boss in the clown mask said. He stuffed the pistol into his back pocket, then walked to the front of the counter and greedily touched the stacks of banknotes. He picked up a stack and rubbed it in front of his nose. It was as if he smelled a delicacy and was intoxicated. He began to open the luggage bag and stuffed the stacks of banknotes into it. Bear with it. The tall and strong man leaned against the back of the chair and peeked at the front. He thought to himself, you can't handle these 3 armed criminals alone. Bear with it. They should leave after taking the money. It won't be too late to catch them then. The development of the situation was just as the boss had planned. In this backward small city, the police response was very slow. Their robbery went very smoothly. After filling up the 2 bags, they swaggered away. No one could stop them. Tonight, they slipped out of the border by boat. The Chinese police couldn't catch a trace of them, but was it really that smooth? At least, there was now a change outside of the plan. Beautiful, beautiful. Supan's eyes lit up and he called out in the few Chinese he knew. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Chapter 122. Poplar Fruit wasn't having a good time either. The person he was dealing with, Supan, was also a Mu TIE fighter. Although he was caught off guard and was dragged to the ground by Poplar Fruit, he was still a criminal who lived on the edge of life and death all year round. Facing an inexperienced Poplar Fruit, he quickly regained his composure. Although Poplar Fruit was strong, he was used to restraining his strength. When his fists landed on Supan's hard muscles, he couldn't do any damage to Supan at all. Even the pain he felt was very mild. Supan struggled and shook off Poplar Fruit. Then, he jumped up like a carp. He looked at Poplar Fruit and grinned, revealing his yellow teeth. He twisted his neck and put a fist under his cheek. His other hand hooked at Poplar Fruit, indicating for him to come and fight. Ah! Ah! Poplar Fruit glanced at the source of the sound from the corner of his eyes. He saw the security guard uncle desperately hugging Doraemon's leg. Doraemon was hugged and fell to the ground while running towards the gun. Although the security guard uncle ignored Doraemon's fierce kicks and hugged him with a nosebleed, he couldn't hold on any longer. Doraemon was less than a meter away from the gun on the ground. As long as he got the gun, everything Poplar Fruit and Hiwanjua did would be in vain. They would even be shot dead by the angry robber. Poplar Fruit saw this scene and cold sweat broke out on his back. The sense of crisis turned into a numbing current that flowed from his tailbone and stimulated Poplar Fruit's brain. Adrenaline was instantly secreted crazily. His whole body seemed to have fallen into an out-of-body state. No. I have to quickly get rid of this barbarian in front of me, Poplar Fruit shouted in his heart as he pounced forward. Supan had long seen that Poplar Fruit was an untrained commoner. He smiled sinisterly as he planned in his mind how he would kick Poplar Fruit over, and then how he would mercilessly smash Poplar Fruit's bones with his fists. Poplar Fruit rushed over, but Supan didn't retreat. He clenched his fist and met Poplar Fruit's fist. Poplar Fruit was scared. He didn't dare to meet force with force. He pulled back his fist and dodged, but he heard the sharp sound of the wind. This was Supan's killer move. The punch just now was just a cover. He twisted his body to the left and used his left supporting leg as the pivot. He rotated his heel to coordinate with his body twisting to the left. His right leg flew towards Poplar Fruit in an arc. If this kick landed, even a cow would be knocked down. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was very focused. It was as if the whole world had entered a state of slow motion. He could clearly feel Supan's leg coming towards his neck below his ear. In this state, he suddenly felt that this seemingly incomparably powerful whip kick was actually full of flaws. He could even simulate several ways to break it in his mind. There was no time to think. Poplar Fruit subconsciously used his right hand to draw a circle around Supan's kick. His speed was even faster than Supan's kick, Supan didn't know what happened. His whip kick seemed to have hit a pile of cotton. The huge force that he transferred to his leg by twisting his waist didn't hit anything. What was worse, his right leg was controlled by poplar fruit. Before Supan could react, his body was involuntarily lifted into the air. He was swung up by poplar fruit. Poplar fruit was really much taller than Supan, who was a little more than 1.6 meters tall. Although poplar fruit's body was a little bent, in order to kick poplar fruit's head, Supan used his left forefoot to support himself on the ground and tiptoed slightly. This caused his center of gravity to not be very stable. Relying on the Tai Chi fist stick technique, Yang Guo was able to neutralize most of Supan's leg strength. Then, she stuck her palms onto Supan's right leg and gently stroked it. Relying on the strength of her hands, she pushed outwards. Supan lost his balance and was lifted up by Yang Guo. It wasn't over yet. Poplar fruit didn't let go of Supan's right leg. He flashed and came to Supan's side. Relying on his explosive brute force, he swung Supan around and smashed him to the ground from the air. With his back facing down, Supan was ruthlessly smashed to the ground. His internal organs were displaced and blood spurted out from his mouth and nose. But he was also tough. He didn't faint after that. His left hand trembled as he tried to get up. He also clenched his right fist. Ah! Poplar fruit roared, as if he wanted to vent his anger after witnessing Supan humiliating the high school girl. He swept his right leg and broke Supan's left hand that was supporting himself. Then, before Supan could cry out in pain, he grabbed Supan's right fist and crossed his hands. Supan's right arm was bent by 90 degrees. This time, Supan finally fainted from the pain. However, both of his arms were no longer human. One of them was pinned under his body, while the other was twisted in a strange position. The broken bones even pierced through his skin and were exposed. Poplar fruit didn't have time to care about his enemy's injuries. When he looked up, he saw the security guard uncle whose face was disfigured and Doraemon who had already broken free. Doraemon picked up the pistol. He was panting and laughing as he raised it. He was aiming at Hee-Wonjua, who was the closest to him and was being beaten back by his boss. Poplar fruit was scared out of his wits. He didn't have time to catch his breath. He jumped to Doraemon's side and kicked Doraemon's hand that was pulling the trigger. Bang! A deafening gunshot rang out in the bank lobby again. A scream came from the resting area behind. Although Poplar fruit kicked the pistol away, Doraemon still fired a shot. However, Poplar fruit's kick still worked. The bullet that was supposed to hit Hee-Wonjua grazed his hair and hit the wall behind him. If it was any lower, Hee-Wonjua's head would have exploded. Even though he wasn't shot, Hee-Wonjua's legs still felt weak. His opponent was a Muay Thai expert who had experienced hundreds of battles. Any small flaw would be taken advantage of. Muay Thai was tricky and fierce. It was the same as Hee-Wonjua's modified military boxing. They were all killing moves. It was hard to say which was better and which was worse. However, even though Hee-Wonjua was a special forces soldier, he wasn't omnipotent. He was best at firearms. In terms of punches and kicks, he was fine against ordinary enemies. However, against such an experienced Muay Thai expert, he quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. His weak legs gave his boss, who was wearing a clown mask, a chance to attack. Boss suddenly stepped forward and punched Hee-Wonjua's head with his right fist. Hee-Wonjua raised his arms to block, but Boss followed up with a knee strike. His back leg bent and hit Hee-Wonjua's abdomen. Hee-Wonjua felt suffocated. He held his stomach and couldn't stand steadily. Bang! Another muffled sound. Hee-Wonjua was kicked a few meters away by Boss. He felt the pain in his bones. However, he clenched his teeth and didn't cry out. He knew that he couldn't give up now. If he gave up, he would die. However, he struggled and couldn't get up. Chapter 123. Fuck. Liu Depao, who was wearing the Doraemon mask, cursed angrily. He was very unhappy. Extremely unhappy. Today, his gun had been kicked out of his hand twice. 2 times. For a person like him who got the nickname Depow because of his outstanding marksmanship, his gun was his lifeblood. But today, he had lost his gun twice in a row. Just now, the shot that was clearly going to hit its target was diverted by Poplar Fruit's interference. He glared fiercely at Poplar Fruit, who had kicked him this time. Just now, he was entangled by the security guard uncle, so he did not notice the situation at Supan's side. But the guy in front of him was white and tender, tall and thin, just like a scholar. At first glance, he knew that he was easy to bully. Liu Depow sneered and leaned forward. His right fist was like a hook, aimed at Poplar Fruit's left ear. Liu Depow had never learned martial arts. In the past, he only played with guns in the army. He did not learn military boxing well. But after following the Thais for years, he had learned a few moves under their influence. His uppercut looked like a real uppercut. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was not the normal Poplar Fruit. He had entered a berserk state. His reaction speed was more agile than before, and his beast-like strength was completely released. The Taiji fist that he practiced every day was now executed as if it was a normal reaction of his body. Taiji fist, press. Poplar Fruit took a deep breath and held his chest. His back was as straight as a mountain. His left palm pulled Liu Depow's fist. Relying on his waist, he lifted Liu Depow's right arm up. Liu Depow was shocked, but his body could not stop. He leaned towards Poplar Fruit. At this moment, Liu Depow was wide open. He did not know how to break free. Poplar Fruit's face was grim. His eyes were ruthless as he stared at Liu Depow's eyes. He met Liu Depow's attack with his left and right fists and punched his chest 10 times. Poplar Fruit's strength was great. Although he could not use all his strength in this position, he could clearly feel that each of his punches broke 1 or 2 of Liu Depow's ribs. Finally, the most powerful punch, Poplar Fruit, hit Liu Depow's heart. Liu Depow was as if he was struck by lightning. His body shook. His eyes, nostrils, and mouth were bleeding. His body was as if his bones were pulled out. At this moment, Poplar Fruit's eyes were red. He did not notice that Liu Depow was on the verge of death. He swept his right leg and lifted Liu Depow up again. He went forward and grabbed him. With a shake of his arms, he threw Liu Depow to the resting area. Liu Depow's body knocked over a few benches in the resting area before rolling to the ground. Poplar Fruit's situation was good. However, He Wonjua's situation was not so good. After he was sent flying by his boss's kick, he could not catch his breath. He could not get up. His abdomen was kicked by his boss again. His whole body slid a few meters on the smooth tile floor. In the end, he stopped when his head hit the wall. His boss pulled off his mask and walked up with a cold smile. He stuttered in Chinese, "You want to stop me? You're not enough. You're dead meat." This kick caused He Wonjua to vomit gastric juices. His fingers trembled as he pressed them on the ground. He could only watch as his boss walked closer with a cold smile. "Damn it. I can't even meet such a strong enemy in this small place. I'm the captain of the special forces in Yangcheng. I can't even beat him. What a disgrace. Looks like I'm going to die here today. It's a pity that I dragged that little brother down with me." Although he was complaining in his heart, He Wonjua's heart was calm. Isn't it just death? Crash. A series of loud sounds suddenly rang out. The boss stopped and looked over in confusion. He saw Liu Depow lying in the middle of 2 benches. He was motionless and unconscious. He then looked at Supan, who was lying on the ground with a broken arm. He was also unconscious. Only then did the boss realize that he was fighting with the most difficult enemy to deal with. In this gap where he could not be distracted, 2 of his subordinates had been defeated. Moreover, Supan, his most trusted little brother, had a broken arm and was lying there with serious injuries. How is this possible? Supan also learned Muay Thai. Although he was young, he was still half as strong as the boss. The main culprit was that Poplar Fruit that he thought didn't have any killing power at first glance. The boss's expression was very interesting. One moment he was furious, the next moment he was in disbelief. One moment his face was black and the next moment his face was red. But his little brother's injuries completely ignited the anger in Supan's heart. He clenched his teeth and pointed at Poplar Fruit with his trembling right index finger. He said word by word, "You will be cut into 10,000 pieces." Although his grammar was a mess, his murderous aura was like a prairie fire. With the last word pieces, it engulfed everything. The people at the back saw that young Guo had taken care of the two people, so they came back to their senses and were ready to cheer. However, when they heard their boss's words, they were so scared that they swallowed their cheers. Poplar Fruit was still in a mysterious state. He wasn't affected by the boss's murderous aura. He was half in a horse stance and focused on the boss's hands and feet. At this moment, any movement in the wind could be magnified dozens of times in Poplar Fruit's ears. Every movement was as clear as it could be in slow motion in his eyes. The boss didn't pull out the pistol on his back. He only wanted to use his strongest fist to avenge his little brother. He roared and rushed over, wanting to kick Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit calmly pulled the boss's leg to release the strength. Then, he lifted the boss up. His actions were exactly the same as when he dealt with his two subordinates. However, the boss's martial arts were much better than Supan and the others. Poplar Fruit only lifted him up, but the boss used his upper body as an axis to jump up. He kicked his other leg towards Poplar Fruit's chin. Poplar Fruit didn't expect him to be able to counterattack in this situation. He hurriedly blocked with his arm to protect his chin. However, his arm was still in pain from the boss's kick. At this time, the boss did a backflip and landed steadily. So strong, Poplar Fruit thought. Wonjua, who was lying on the side, hadn't recovered. Although he couldn't stand up or speak, he still saw the fight between Poplar Fruit and the others. He thought, "So, I'm the weakest. Little brother, do your best. Kill him." Wonjua was also trying his best to adjust his breathing. As long as he could help, the two of them would definitely be able to take down this Muay Thai expert. Poplar Fruit was at a disadvantage from the start. The boss's Muay Thai was much more powerful than Supan's. All kinds of tricky and fierce moves were used. Poplar Fruit, who didn't know anything about Muay Thai, couldn't parry them. In Muay Thai, the most powerful moves weren't the fists, but the elbows and knees. Flat elbows, pressing elbows, smashing elbows, covering elbows, double elbows, rushing knees, bending knees, stabbing knees, piercing knees, flying knees, etc. These were the most powerful moves in Muay Thai. Someone once said, "It's better to use your elbows and knees than your fists." The elbows were the hardest, while the knees were the heaviest. If you hit someone with these two moves, it would be easy to make them lose their ability to fight due to the pain. If it was said that Poplar Fruit could still counterattack against the fists and legs, but against the boss's elbows and knees, Poplar Fruit could only clench his teeth and block. But after 2 or 3 times, Poplar Fruit's arm was covered in red and green bruises. It was very painful. Poplar Fruit could feel a slight warm flow in his body, slowly warming up the area that was hit. But the effect was too slow. If this continued, sooner or later he wouldn't be able to hold on. Think. Under the stimulation of adrenaline, Poplar Fruit's mind became clearer. He forced himself to use his brain to think of how to fight and not rely on his instincts to make a move. Elbows and knees, aren't those moves only used by the boss when he gets close? That's right. As long as I keep a distance from him, he won't be able to use those moves on me. There was a chant in Taiji Fist, "Let him hit me with all his might, pull him with 4 tails to lift 1,000 jin, let him hit me with all his might, 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 let him hit me with all his might." Why do I have to tangle with him? Isn't this using my weak points to attack his strong points? Suddenly enlightened, Poplar Fruit began to pull away from the boss by 2 body lengths. You advance and I retreat, you retreat and I advance. Of course, Poplar Fruit wasn't just retreating. He relied more on his nimble body movements to circle around the boss and coordinate with his hand gestures to make his attacks miss. This time it was the boss's turn to suffer. His punches and kicks were mainly fierce, aiming to rely on speed and strength to defeat the enemy. Right now, his speed couldn't keep up with Poplar Fruit's and his strength was hitting the air. Every time he punched with all his strength, his chest felt stuffy. After circling around for a while, the boss began to feel tired. He panted heavily, and his eyes were a little unfocused. It had been too long since he met such a difficult opponent. His body was far from being as strong as it was when he was young. It's time to counterattack. Poplar Fruit understood. He took advantage of the boss not being able to pull back his punches in time to suddenly stop retreating and turn around. Although Poplar Fruit hadn't fought with anyone before today, when he fought with Su Pan and Liu De Pao, he was completely bloodthirsty. He didn't care how badly he beat the enemy. At this time, Poplar Fruit couldn't hold back his strength. Poplar Fruit suddenly used his right foot as an axis and circled to the boss's side. His left hand grabbed the boss's left fist, and his right arm blocked the boss's left elbow. Suddenly, he pulled outwards. Although it seemed like a lot of movements, in reality, it all happened in a flash. With a crisp sound and a scream, Poplar Fruit directly broke the boss's left arm. "While you're sick, I'll take your life." Yang Guo swept his leg at the boss's knee, forcing him to kneel down. Then, he followed up with a whip kick towards the boss's head. The boss fell to the ground like a sack. As soon as the boss turned around, his eyes were filled with Poplar Fruit's huge fist. He subconsciously tilted his head. Poplar Fruit's fist brushed past his ear and smashed into the floor. The mirror-like tiles actually cracked. "Dodge! Let's see how many you can dodge." Poplar Fruit smashed again with all his strength. The boss raised his right arm to block in front of his face, but with a crack, his right arm broke. In the end, Poplar Fruit's fist still landed on the boss's head. Although the strength was much weaker, it was still powerful. With a muffled bang, the boss's eyes rolled back, and he fainted while spitting out blood. Poplar Fruit still didn't let go. He raised his right fist high and prepared to smash down again. "Enough. If you hit him again, he'll die." A pair of big hands pulled Poplar Fruit's fist and anxiously called out. It was He Wanjue who had just recovered. Chapter 124. Poplar Fruit's right fist was being held. He still wanted to struggle and even throw the person holding him away. Fortunately, he heard He Wanjue's voice, so he withdrew his strength. "Is it over?" Poplar Fruit looked at the boss who was being beaten by him on the ground and muttered. "Cough, cough, it's over. You beat them all down, ha, cough, cough." Perhaps it was because he had just been kicked by the boss, and because he had used a lot of strength to hold Poplar Fruit's hand, He Wanjue had just opened his mouth when the muscles in his lungs spasmed again, and he coughed violently. The boss's state at this time was that his eyes had turned white, and he was exhaling more than he was inhaling. He was about to die. Poplar Fruit suddenly got off his body in a hurry and stepped away from this person. His eyes were filled with fear. This was me." He Wanjue put away the 3 pistols, then sat beside Poplar Fruit and patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder. He laughed heartily and said, "Yes, it was you. Good job, little brother. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. I owe you my life." Poplar Fruit didn't listen to He Wanjue at all. He was still in a state of delirium. "He's dying. I killed him. I killed him." He Wanjue patted Poplar Fruit's face and said seriously, "Little brother, look at me." He shouted too loudly, and he coughed violently again. He stared into Poplar Fruit's eyes and said, "Listen, you didn't kill anyone. Even if you did, what you did was right. These people were all vicious criminals, and they had guns. In that situation, if you didn't kill them, they would kill you. Do you understand?" Cough. Poplar Fruit lay on the ground and retched. After a while, he felt a little better. This fight had completely exceeded his own imagination. He had never thought that he could fight so well. Moreover, he had been able to injure and cripple his opponent so easily. The impact on his heart was too great. Hiwanjua patted Poplar Fruit's back and wanted to continue persuading him. Poplar Fruit supported himself with his hand, sat back, and waved his hand with a pale face. He said, "Big brother thank you. I'm fine. How are the others?" After they knocked down the gangster, the other people in the bank hall who were still in shock slowly came back to their senses. The two women who knew each other began to hug each other, and the others slowly sat up straight on the ground. The after effects of surviving a disaster, the weakness in their limbs, was not something that would disappear in a short time. The high school girls were much better. 3 of them who were not bullied crawled to the girl lying on the ground, hugged her, and helped her tidy up her clothes. The girl's head leaned weakly on their shoulders, sobbing. She felt lucky, but more than that, she felt wronged and scared. The police finally arrived at Shanshan. Dozens of cars surrounded the bank entrance, and the person in charge shouted through a loudspeaker for the criminals to surrender. Poplar Fruit looked like he was sleepwalking. He didn't know how Hiwanjua called the police in. The police stared dumbfounded at the mess in the bank hall. They called an ambulance to pick up the 3 criminals, the injured old man, and the security guard uncle. Then, they arranged for several police cars to take the rest of the people back to the police station. When Poplar Fruit came back to his senses, he was already sitting in the police station. Hiwanjua was sitting opposite him with a smile. "What's going on?" Poplar Fruit looked at Hiwanjua in confusion. "Little brother, your martial arts are good, but you're still not brave enough. You're scared out of your wits over a small matter." Hiwanjua laughed. Poplar Fruit shook his head and asked, "What's going on now?" "We're taking a statement at the police station," Hiwanjua said. "But it's okay, I've already recorded it for you." "Poplar Fruit, right? I'm sorry, I didn't ask for your permission to see your ID card." Hiwanjua lightly tossed a wallet into Yangguo's hand. "It's okay." Poplar Fruit forced a smile. "This time, I really have to thank you, Brother Yang," Hiwanjua said seriously. "You saved me twice. The first time, if you didn't kick me, I would have been shot. The second time, you helped me defeat the Muay master." Poplar Fruit smiled embarrassedly. "You don't have to be like this. I was in a hurry and didn't think too much. How is it? Is the case solved now? How can it be so fast, you know? Of the 3 people, 1 is dead and 2 are injured. The injured one is still lying in the hospital. It's estimated that it won't be so fast. And now, with such a big case, the provincial office has already sent someone to take over. Don't worry." Hiwanjua laughed. "Someone died?" Poplar Fruit's face paled. "Don't worry." Hiwanjua went to Poplar Fruit's side, patted Poplar Fruit's arm with his stout arm, and said, "You're just defending yourself. I've already helped you deal with it. No one will trouble you." "Thank you, big brother Poplar Fruit gratefully said. "No, this is what I should do." Hiwanjua waved his hand and said, "You saved me, I should be thanking you." "You don't have to thank me," a thick and magnetic middle-aged man's voice sounded behind Poplar Fruit. "If you want to say thank you, I should be the one thanking you." The person who came was a man in his 40s, wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He looked cultured and elegant, like a teacher from a university. When Hiwanjua saw him, he quickly stood up and said, "County Magistrate Chen, why are you here?" This time he came down for a mission, and he had dealt with the leaders of the county. Although his military rank was very high, he still showed due respect to the local leaders. "County Magistrate?" When Poplar Fruit saw this, he also quickly stood up. Sit down, sit down." County Magistrate Chen pressed their shoulders and asked them to sit back down. He said gratefully, "I heard about this matter from them. I'm really grateful to you today." "Oh, County Magistrate Chen, you're too kind." Hiwanjua laughed, "At least I'm still a soldier. It's our duty to protect the safety of the people's property. In this kind of situation, I can't just stand by and watch." Poplar Fruit didn't know how to answer, but he also nodded. "No, thank you. I'm not just thanking you as a county magistrate for helping my county to resolve a crisis," County Magistrate Chen said. "I'm thanking you as a father for saving my daughter." This time, Poplar Fruit and Hiwanjua were stunned. Poplar Fruit hesitated and asked, That girl is your daughter. Yes, she is my daughter. Now her mood is still unstable, and she's still in the hospital, so she can't come with me. My daughter's chastity was saved by the two of you. I'm here, bowing to the two of you, thank you for saving my daughter's life." When he said this, the old man's tears fell. This county magistrate was now just a poor girl's father. He was full of tears, and he deeply bowed to Poplar Fruit and Wanjua. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations, please use your votes to support the poor. Chapter 125. Daddy. Kiki stretched out her hand and touched her daddy's chin. There was a new stubble there, and it was a little prickly. Kiki was both afraid and delighted at the same time. Poplar Fruit caught her off guard and clamped down on Kiki's hand with his chin and neck. The stubble rubbed against her hand gently, causing Kiki to frown in pain. She was so anxious that she was about to cry. Poplar Fruit knew when to stop and let go of Kiki with a chuckle. However, Kiki did not learn her lesson. After her hand stopped hurting, she chuckled and touched her daddy's chin again. Even after so many times, she still did not find it annoying. As Poplar Fruit teased Kiki, he sighed at yesterday's miraculous experience. It was rare for him to make a trip to his hometown's bank, but he encountered a robbery. Furthermore, the robbers were not ordinary people, but foreign Muay Thai masters. Those robbers probably did not expect that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers in the bank. Not only was there the captain of the special forces from Yangcheng City's military, but there was also Poplar Fruit, a martial arts master who did not even know his own strength. Actually, they had guns. If not for the fact that they wanted to make a move on that beautiful high school girl, they would not have let their guard down. That gave the infuriated Poplar Fruit and Wanjua a chance to retaliate. This battle was won by a hair's breadth. However, Poplar Fruit and Wanjua did not expect that the high school girl they saved would be the county head of Poplar Fruit's hometown. After this trip, Poplar Fruit and the captain of the special forces from Yangcheng City's military had formed a life and death friendship. Wanjua even addressed Poplar Fruit as his brother before he left and even invited him to visit his house when he was free. Not only that, Poplar Fruit had also become the county head's benefactor. In China, it was easier to get things done with connections. In a small county like his hometown, to be able to form a relationship with an official was definitely a source of wealth. The benefits were immediate. At the thank you banquet held by the county magistrate at noon, Poplar Fruit only mentioned the business of his sister and brother-in-law when County Magistrate Chen asked about it. County Magistrate Chen patted his chest and said, "Open a store? No problem, I'll get someone to pick a good store for you in the new trade city at the station." Therefore, before his sister and brother-in-law's business had even started, they had already developed from a purely online business to a two-pronged business both online and offline. Let's not talk about whether the online store could make money. Just look at the Poplar Fruit at the station. There was a good store in the newly built trade city that sold everything for money. What's more, County Head Chen had taken the initiative to fight for low-interest loans to support small and micro-industries, as well as the lowest shop rent. Everything happened too fast and too suddenly. Poplar Fruit still felt like he was in a dream. However, Poplar Fruit didn't want such a thing to happen again. That was because he was no longer alone. His every move affected the hearts of his entire family. Yesterday at the police station, he only saw his family when it was almost night time. His mother, who had been worried when she heard the gunshot, hugged Poplar Fruit tightly when she saw him. She was afraid that her son would be gone if she turned around. His sister also pulled Poplar Fruit to check on him with red eyes. She only relaxed when she saw that Poplar Fruit wasn't missing any parts. Not only was his family worried, but Poplar Fruit also couldn't hold back. He hugged Kiki, who had cried for a long time and finally fell into a deep sleep. His heart ached. He knew that when he wasn't by her side, Kiki needed her father too much. If something really happened to him because of the robbery, what would happen to Kiki? Kiki didn't have a mother and a father. How could she survive at such a young age? Poplar Fruit didn't dare to think about it. He just hugged his daughter and didn't want to let go for a long time. He Wonjua asked Magistrate Chen to keep the details of the case confidential, especially the information about him and Poplar Fruit. He Wonjua considered that on one hand, his identity was special. On the other hand, he didn't know if these robbers had accomplices who went out to protect Poplar Fruit. He Wonjua hoped that fewer people knew about this matter. Poplar Fruit obviously didn't have any objections. He also didn't want this matter to cause an uproar and become the talk of the town. After returning home, his father, Yang Tai, asked about his well-being again. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he fed Kiki milk and coaxed her to sleep. Then, he closed the door and went to sleep. To be honest, after a big battle and a day and night of torment, Poplar Fruit was really tired. However, the physical tiredness was secondary. More importantly, he was mentally exhausted. He had been under a lot of pressure at the bank. After that, he didn't rest. He had been going through the procedures at the police station and chatting with the magistrate. It was only now that he could truly relax. He was physically and mentally exhausted. Ever since Poplar Fruit started practicing the internal martial arts, he hadn't been this tired. Therefore, he slept from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until it was pitch black outside. Poplar Fruit woke up because of Kiki's cries from the baby stroller that was laid flat like a cradle. In the dark, Poplar Fruit sat on the bed in a daze for a while. Only then did he completely wake up. He just had a dream. Poplar Fruit felt extremely happy at that moment. He clenched his fists and murmured with his eyes closed, "I'm 1 year older. In the new year, I hope that my family will be healthy and happy. I hope that Kiki can grow up happily and healthily, but don't grow too fast. Dad still likes your cute look, haha. I also hope." Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment. A blurry figure flashed in his mind, but he still extinguished that impossible thought and continued, "I hope that in the future, I can find a good girl who loves Kiki and me. Then, I can hold her hand and Kiki's hand. Our family will never leave each other and will continue to walk together." Seeing that Poplar Fruit opened his eyes, everyone began to shout in unison, "Blow out the candles, blow out the candles, blow out all of them." Kiki was also unwilling to be left out, so she followed along and shouted, 24 candles. So many. You guys. Do you think I can't finish blowing all of them?" Poplar Fruit shouted mischievously. He took a deep breath, bent down, and blew fiercely. Then, from left to right, all 24 candles were blown out. Brother-in-law was the first to turn on the lights in the courtyard. The courtyard was suddenly lit up. Poplar Fruit squinted his eyes and saw the smiles on the faces of his family members. Kiki was still in a daze from the change of darkness to light. She tilted her head, looked left and right, and finally found her father. The most excited one was Yang Linjie. He pulled the corner of his mother's clothes and jumped, shouting excitedly, "Eat cake, eat cake." Everyone was amused by this gluttonous child and burst out in laughter. Laughter reverberated throughout the entire courtyard. Even the resplendent starry sky could not hide the radiance of happiness. In another world shrouded by the starry sky, a small boat was speeding on the vast ocean. It was quietly drifting across the country's border under the cover of night. Along the way, it was daunting but not dangerous. Finally, it reached the waters of Vietnam. Suddenly, a head stretched out from the cabin. He looked longingly at the road he came from, even though it was also a boundless dark ocean. "Smoker, what are you doing? Sit tight, the boat is not stable." A voice came from behind. The head looked hatefully in the direction of the small county that made them suffer. He swore in a low voice, "Boss, Big Pow, just you wait. I will definitely come back to avenge you. Everyone, use your votes to smash the paw." She was a typical post-90s girl, although she was actually born in the late 80s. She was playful, had a personality, and had a very unique way of thinking. However, Xiao Yarrow was a very pure girl. When she was with Song Jiwen, she was still pure and was very conservative about relationships. Other than the fact that she was influenced by anime, She was really like a blank piece of paper. Her heart was very pure, and she believed that everything was beautiful. Therefore, as a public kindergarten teacher, she was especially liked by children and parents. Song Jiwen really didn't know how to break up with such a girl. Xiao Yarrow wanted to stick to him all day long. Song Jiwen was a little tired of it and wanted to find a new passion. However, he was worried that if he broke up with her, this crystal-like girl would be smashed into pieces again. Therefore, the two of them were entangled for half a year until Xiao Yarrow said that she wanted to deepen the relationship between the two of them. She planned to change to a job closer to here and then move in with Song Jiwen. Song Jiwen's character couldn't be restrained. He wanted to live a single life, but he was unwilling to be lonely and wanted to pursue excitement. This time, Xiao Yarrow really scared Song Jiwen. He couldn't delay it any longer. If he delayed it any longer, wouldn't Xiao Yarrow be insatiable and propose to him? Song Jiwen decided to cut the Gordian knot and settle this matter as soon as possible so that he wouldn't delay this good girl. He found an opportunity to ask Xiao Yarrow out and officially break up with her. Poplar Fruit didn't know what the situation was like at that time. Perhaps Xiao Yarrow was heartbroken and even begged, but Song Jiwen was really determined to break up with her. Being trapped by love like this wasn't Song Jiwen's style, right? For so many years, he had dumped so many girls, but he had never seen him so sad and haggard. Poplar Fruit asked doubtfully, "Don't tell me you only remembered to cherish her after losing her? Since you can't bear to part with her, why don't you get Xiao Yarrow back?" "She's gone," Song Jiwen said in a low voice. His eyes were silently dripping with tears. "Gone? Where did she go?" Poplar Fruit asked, puzzled. "She didn't go anywhere. She's dead. She's gone," Song Jiwen shouted impatiently. "Dead? Dead?" Poplar Fruit was shocked. He couldn't believe this fact. A person was fine. How could she be gone? After asking for a long time, Poplar Fruit pieced together the whole story from Song Jiwen's intermittent responses. It turned out that after Kitten went home crying that day, she called Song Jiwen more than 10 times, but Song Jiwen didn't pick up. The next day, Kitten went to work. She didn't sleep the whole night and was thinking about something. She walked on the street absent-mindedly. Suddenly, she was hit by a car that ran a red light. She was sent to the hospital, but Xiao Yarrow wasn't saved. She might not even have the will to live. Song Jiwen couldn't speak clearly. He covered his face and choked with sobs. "If I didn't break up with her, this accident wouldn't have happened. Maybe she could have held on a little longer. Maybe she could have survived." Song Jiwen fell into deep self-blame at this moment. He repeated over and over again, "If we didn't break up, she wouldn't have died." Poplar Fruit sat beside him and put his arm around his shoulder. He wanted to comfort him, but he didn't know what to say. Thousands of words came out of his mouth, but they became a dry sentence. "Mosquito, it's not your fault." Song Jiwen looked back at Poplar Fruit and said, "Laro Guo, if you say it's not my fault, do you believe it?" Yes, Poplar Fruit didn't believe this sentence himself. If he put himself in Poplar Fruit's shoes, he would also take the blame. This could be seen from Wu Yu's difficult labor. He was still guilty of Wu Yu's death, although this guilt had slowly faded because of his fatherly love for Kiki. How could Poplar Fruit persuade him? He could only rack his brains and come up with different ways to tell Song Jiwen that Xiao Yarrow's death was already a fact. No matter how regretful he was, no matter how sad he was, he couldn't bring Xiao Yarrow back to life. Poplar Fruit was worried that Song Jiwen would fall sick from grief because of this, or even sink into depression. What you should do now is to change yourself. Don't treat relationships as child's play. In the future, you have to treat everyone who loves you seriously. Let Xiao Yarrow see you in heaven and feel a little gratified. Poplar Fruit said earnestly. At this moment, Song Jiwen's dim eyes seemed to have a bit of life. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.